Good afternoon. October 2nd, 2018 meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance if you'd like to. Call the roll, please.
Certainly. Councilmember Frieden.
Here.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rose.
Here.
Councilmember Hart.
Here.
Councilmember Sneddon. Here. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
And Mayor Murillo.
Here. Madam Clerk, we have a couple of ceremonial items.
Item 1, Employee Recognition Service Award Pins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Good afternoon. As you know, each month we like to recognize employees for achieving certain milestones in their service with the city. I have a number of names I'd like to read into the record, and there's one employee who is here to receive her pin in person. With 5 years of service to the city, Melissa Bonillo, Housing Program Specialist, Community Development Department. James Hamilton, Senior Accountant, Finance Department. Kyle Rapp, Police Officer, Police Department. Mark Sewell, Accounting Manager, Finance Department. Brett Volpe, Senior Tree Trimmer, Parks and Recreation Department. With 10 years of service to the city, James Hatzidakis, Parking Coordinator, Waterfront Department. With 20 years of service to the city, Judith McCaffrey, Recreation Programs Manager, Parks and Recreation Department. And with 30 years of service to the city, David Lewis, Wastewater Treatment Supervisor, Public Works Department, and Allison Baird, Plans Examiner, Community Development Department, and she's here to receive her pin in person.
Ms. Baird, please come up. Here's your pin. Thank you. This is a certificate of appreciation for valued service to the City of Santa Barbara. Allison Baird, Plans Examiner, 30 years of service. Allison Baird was hired in October of 1998 as a senior clerk for the records section of Building and Safety and Community Development. In October 1991, her position was reclassified to an Office Specialist 3, where she was transferred to the Building and Safety Administration section, providing clerical and administrative support to the Chief Building Official and Assistant Building Official. In July of 1994, Allison was transferred back to the records section as a senior office specialist. In August of 1997, Allison was temporarily appointed clerical coordinator overseeing the records section. In April 1998, Allison was promoted to a building inspector aide, and in August of 2010, she was promoted to a plans examiner, which is her current position. Allison is a certified plans examiner by the International Code Council and performs plan reviews primarily on residential structures, ensuring building code compliance with the California Code of Regulations and city ordinances. Allison supports the city's building permit counterstaff and assists in coordinating with the various land development team departments to ensure that projects are processed and delivered to applicants on time. Allison is a valued member of the Community Development Department's Building and Safety Division and a pleasure to work with. Allison Barrett, on behalf of the City Council, the residents of Santa Barbara, and your fellow employees, it's a great pleasure to honor you for your exemplary career and outstanding service to our community. There you go. Please say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. 30 years, that's a long time. Doesn't really register that it's 30 years, but it's been great, and I've been enjoying working with the city. Thank you all.
Housing America Month, October 2018.
We have some good celebrations today. It's Housing America Month, and thank you for being here. Whereas for 80 plus years, it has been federal policy to financially help states combat housing shortages and unsafe and unsanitary housing conditions. And whereas nearly 41 million households pay more than 50% of their income for housing, and per a national 2018 report, in no state can a full-time minimum wage earner afford a 1 or 2 bedroom rental at fair market value. And whereas an estimated 650,000 people nationwide are homeless each night, 3.5 million Americans experience homelessness at some point each year. And per the 2017 homeless count, 790 are homeless each night in Santa Barbara. And whereas, according to the Office of the State Treasurer, California is short 1.5 million housing units, with only 13,850 new units produced per year. And whereas local service workers, teachers, nurses, emergency responders, and many other working professionals at the core of our community are priced out of home ownership, with the median home in Santa Barbara at $1,143,000, and struggle to afford rent, with a 2-bedroom unit averaging $2,500 per month. And whereas the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, along with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the National Housing Conference, and the Housing Assistance Council, declared October as Housing America Month to inform the public and decision makers of the critical need to address the nation's housing and community development concerns. And whereas the City of Santa Barbara remains committed to addressing local affordable housing and community development needs. Now, therefore, I, Kathy Murillo, by virtue of the authority vested in me as Mayor of the City of Santa Barbara, do hereby proclaim October 2018 as Housing America Month in our city, and endorse the Housing America campaign with a commitment to make local affordable housing and community development needs a priority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and City Council members. I am so proud of the work that we have done as a community with your support in providing affordable housing for members of our community here. And we're a national model here in Santa Barbara for what we provide, and we want to continue to do that because we know there's such a great need. So appreciate the proclamation of Housing America Month. And we have a couple of activities to celebrate our good work. This coming Monday, the 8th, we're having a groundbreaking celebration for Johnson Court, which is a 17-unit development to serve homeless veterans, and we're happy to get that underway. And also, October 13th is Housing Santa Barbara Day, and my colleague, Jerry Morales, envisioned this day, and he wants to say a few words about it.
Please, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Madam Mayor, council members, thank you very much for the proclamation, Housing America Month in October. As part of the national campaign, the Housing Authority, in conjunction with Second Story Associates, decided that more needed to be done locally. So we came up with the idea of Housing Santa Barbara Day here in Santa Barbara on Saturday, October 13th in De La Guerra Plaza from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. What we'll be doing is bringing together residents, housing agencies, city and county leaders, as well as local nonprofits, which provide services that assist residents in having successful tenancies. Agencies will provide information on the day of the event of what is available today, right now, but they'll also be able to take home a housing resource guide that they can use throughout the year so that they know where they can turn to when they need more assistance in maintaining their housing. We'll have activities, entertainment, and food trucks at this event. Activities will include an idea wall for participants to write down their housing ideas, a model home building activity, a poster drawing booth for the young at heart to draw what home means to me. Now, this event is not about reducing landlord rights, but it's about encouraging ideas on increasing the available inventory of affordable housing. We also want to stress that this effort is not only, although very important, not only about ideas on how to reduce homelessness or to help the poorest, but also to foster more programs that address the affordability crisis facing our middle-income earners like teachers, emergency responders, social workers, as well as city and county workers. We need this to ensure that we have the best possible pool of candidates to maintain the vitality of our local economy and the beautiful history and culture of our community. I would like to invite each and one of you, every one of you, to join us on October 13th, to engage with our neighbors, to hear their ideas, and to encourage their continued participation in this process. We will have a table set up for you so that you can engage our community. Now, while the focus at this moment is the day of the event, we plan to encourage communication throughout the year between these agencies and community groups to foster collaboration on any and all ideas that promote affordable housing options for all. Please join us for Housing Santa Barbara Day.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Fredericks. We close our ceremonial items section. Changes to the agenda, Mr. Casey? None? We're opening open public comment now, and this is our opportunity to hear from the public. These are matters not on the agenda. And please know that we will not be able to get into a discussion with you, but if need be, we will refer you to Nicole, who's in the back of the room, and she can make an appointment with any of us or refer you to staff if you have questions. Thank you, Nicole. Caroline, you're first. Come on up. You'll be followed by Phil Walker. I see you out there, Mr. Walker, followed by Anna Marie Gott, and then Mark Marshall Wofford. You have 2 minutes, Ms. Caroline.
Thank you. Members of the Santa Barbara City Council, thank you for allowing me to speak with you. I support President Trump and am proud to support his nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Senate confirmation hearings for nomination to the Supreme Court should be a solemn and dignified occasion. Indeed, a matter of national pride, uniting our country, showing the legal brilliance of the judges who will render decisions on the highest court of the greatest nation in the world. Instead, what we witnessed last Thursday was the exact opposite. The predictable problems and disorder that result when common sense and right reason are betrayed, allowing for the vicious attack on the cornerstone of our legal system, innocent until proven guilty. Judge Kavanaugh has clearly and absolutely denied that he has ever assaulted anyone, ever. As well, there are several key inconsistencies in the testimony of the accuser. The accusations identified witnesses to the event. However, those witnesses either refuted the allegations or failed to corroborate them. Also, the person accusing Judge Kavanaugh of assaulting her has no memory of the key details about the alleged assault, including exactly when it allegedly happened, in what house it allegedly happened, and how she returned home after the alleged event. We should never again have to watch the pain, anguish, and frustration of a person wrongly and humiliatingly and unjustly accused, being forced to do the impossible under the assumption of guilt, prove their innocence. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you, and may each person listening have a good afternoon.
Phil Walker, you're next.
This is great. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I noticed that David Lewis was recognized for 30 years of service as a supervisor at El Estero Treatment Plant. I actually had the privilege of being on David's hiring board. That would have been probably 1986. I started in 81. And I guess I made a good choice because David has been a tremendous asset up through the ranks and into the supervisorial position, tremendous asset to El Estero and the city of Santa Barbara, and he's never shied away from getting his hands dirty either. So that was very good to see. Hopefully you'll have a few more. I'm just speaking from 35 years there. Okay, I got a notice from Edison about the time they had the open house at Earl Warren saying that I live on the east side. The mayor knows where I approximately live. I could throw a hard ball on a good day from my house down to Milpas Street. So now it's stated here, as a community member who has a home or business in a high fire risk area. is Edison making this determination, or was it just a blanket determination? But I've received nothing as far as a notice from the city planning department or city fire department that I now live in a high fire risk area. I sort of react when it happens. The Sycamore fire, I was very, very concerned. I had the hose going on the roof, and the first notice I got that was people running down the street screaming. And those very heavy galvanized steel trash cans were being wafted down the street by the wind, so that was the scariest it's been. But possibly the city fire department needs to coordinate with Edison and make some sort of determination, because this can possibly affect your insurance premiums. One other quick thing. A lady had a sort of bad incident. The city fire department responded. I got out there about 11:45 at night, Friday evening, and her car caught on fire.
Your time is up.
So the fire department got it out, and she's doing okay. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Ms. Gott, come on up. You have 6 minutes. Michael Miranda, I see you back there. Jose Gallegos, I see you. If you need all 6 minutes, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Mayor Ricard, actually a number of years ago, drew a map. He included the airport in the map of the city. Little did he know that when he drew that map, that it would actually end up being the place where the city council was going to decide that as a way to exclude the public from actually coming to the meetings, because it's 10 miles away, it's not downtown, not anywhere where anyone really can walk to, that you would start holding meetings there. I think that you shouldn't have any more meetings there. You should have them here at City Council with the cameras on. My takeaway from the meetings, the mayor, in response to something that Councilmember Gutierrez was talking about, said, all those residents, basically, that complain are government haters and jealous of her and then your pension. I don't think about your pension. I don't think about what you get paid, but I do think about the job that you are doing and the lack of change in Santa Barbara. I think about what residents are dealing with. I don't think about your pension, but Mario, every time you complain to her, that's what she's thinking about. The complainers, the people that come up to City Council and talk at public comment, they are government haters and they are jealous of her pension. That's what she thinks of residents, and not one of you actually stood up for residents. Not one of you said anything to dissuade her of that comment. More importantly, when the representative who got paid $12,000 to host the meeting, and quite frankly, he didn't do a great job, and now you want to have 4 of them a year, he said there is no leadership and there is no vision for Santa Barbara. And not one of you said anything, because it's the truth. We have a mayor who, as far as I can see, ran away during the mudslides, tossed and kicked the can down the road for the AUD so that she could protect people from actually having to pay impact fees for AUD projects, refused to make a decision on the inclusionary housing that would actually help residents. What has she done and what have you guys really done this year? I don't see a lot. I see a lot of kicking the can down the road, and I also see a lot of picking on people. And you don't want transparency. Councilmember Dominguez wanted a report, wanted to know what the value of the meeting was, what was going to happen, and to release that information to residents. He got none of those things and he got censured. Well, you guys talked about censoring all sorts of people when you were at the meeting. You talked about reducing public comments for people that criticize you. That's what it's about. You can't take the criticism. And you need to take the criticism because people are not here out of their day because they think you're doing a good job. There's problems in the city and they want you to fix them. There are 90,000 residents in this city, and you see maybe 30 of them here right now, and that's it. That is a tiny number of people that show up to talk about things, but yet you say at the meeting that you have too much public engagement. That was ridiculous. You don't have enough public engagement. You don't have enough people sitting in these council chambers. I want to know, is Mario too thin-skinned? I want to know what value you actually got out of the meeting that you couldn't have had here. I didn't see a lot of value at that meeting. I really didn't. And I have been to a lot of corporate retreats. I quite frankly, and a lot of other do, find your temperament as mayor questionable. That you bully people. That you backstab the people that you say that you support. You hold grudges, and everybody knows it. The meeting, for me, left a bad taste in my mouth, and everyone who has listened to that audio tape, you know what I got back? They called you kinglets. That was their description of the meeting that you had. They were actually supportive of the retreat, but came away infuriated and disgusted about the things that you talked about and about ganging up on Jason, about ganging up on residents that weren't there, about trying to take away the time for public comment and the only time people have to actually tell you what they think that you're doing.
Ms. Gott.
Thank you.
Mark Marshall Wolford, you're next. You'll be followed by Ellen Bilstein and then Cassandra Ensberg, and we'll close public comment after that. Welcome, sir.
Hello, everybody. My name's Mark Marshall Wofford. I just want you guys to know I have the utmost respect for each and every one of you up there on that board. And furthermore, what happened to me down here at this Path place where they're supposed to be helping people, they put me out on at least 2 occasions without any reason. I don't drink. I didn't do anything wrong. Even the fire department across the street took me over there personally. They still wouldn't let me in. The reason, I don't know. They told me one time I didn't fit the criteria. So, I don't know. You guys let me know if you can figure that one out. But furthermore, there's just a lot of other things I'd like to get to, but I just want you to know I'm not happy with that, and maybe you guys can find out, somebody can dig into that, because I need a home, and I need my housing, and if somebody can help me get back on my feet, I surely appreciate it. Thank you. Have a blessed day.
Thank you. Mr. Dominguez?
Is Holly here?
It's Nicole today.
Sir, would you give your information, please, to Nicole? And I have a list of resources that I can refer you to if that would be of assistance.
Ms. Bilston? There she is.
Good afternoon. I wanted to let you all know, if you haven't heard about it already, there is a big architecture tour happening this coming Saturday, organized by our local AIA, the American Institute of Architects. It is our 10th annual architect tour. It will be all day Saturday, October 6th, from 10 until 4 in the afternoon, and then an after party at SB Caw. It is themed after the charrette that our organization had last year, and we'll be featuring 12 different projects. It's designed as a walking tour, so it's mostly along State Street and the nearby streets around State Street, highlighting projects that demonstrate some examples of housing, of adaptive reuse, of infill projects, of live-work opportunities that people have created, hopefully showing some examples of other things that as we move forward and we revitalize our downtown will be good examples of other things we could do in our community. So we welcome everyone to join the tour on Saturday. Hopefully a few of you will also join us for the party. I think there'll be a lot of good discussion around those topics that I mentioned that pertain to improving our downtown. The projects range from historic projects to very modern ones and a variety of styles. So there should be some interesting things for lots of people to see. So come join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ensberg?
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, City Council. I'm Cassandra Ensberg, and I'm an architect here in Santa Barbara, and wanted just to add to what Ellen just said about the tour. And I wanted to, but I think she's pretty much covered it all, so I'll just take this moment to thank you all for all the work that you do. I know it's not easy, and that we have great challenges going on in our city right now. The AIA has been working very hard for the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we did the charrette for State Street, and talking about ideas, including housing for State Street, and the tour is going to be focusing on some of that. And we will also be having at some of the locations information about the charrette, encouraging more of the community to come out and talk about it and give their ideas. So I just want to acknowledge all of you for your hard work. We have to all hold hands together and work together as a community. We're all part of it, and we all have to be part of the solution. So we hope to see you at the tour and to continue to work together. I was excited to hear about the housing, the many housing focus groups that are coming up. And thank you very much.
And is information on your website for the public? Is it AIASB?
Yes, AIASB.org. You can get tickets online, or you can also go over to the morning of the tour. You can get tickets then. I think it's also possible that you can get tickets at some of the different locations. People can help you there. But as Ellen already said, it is focused on State Street and downtown.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. That closes public comment. We'll go to the consent calendar. Items to read, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mayor. Item 4, adoption of ordinance for lease agreement with Santa Barbara Arts Collaborative for Community Arts Workshop site at 631 Garden Street. Recommendation of the Council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the city administrator to execute a 25-year lease agreement with the Santa Barbara Arts Collaborative for the development and use of city-owned property located at 631 Garden Street as a community arts workshop commencing upon the effective date of the enabling ordinance.
Okay. If there's no further objection, we'll waive further reading, and I'll entertain a motion to move the consent calendar forward. So moved. That was Rouse. Second. With the second from Hart. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we got that done. Next is a report from the Finance Committee. Mr. Hart.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today to consider loan forgiveness for a city loan that was issued back in the late 1990s for the Housing Authority's Garden Court project. That project has recently been acquired from the private sector developer that helped develop the project in the first place, and the Housing Authority is moving forward to preserve and extend the affordability of that really critical senior housing project in Santa Barbara for many, many years into the end of this century. And that item will be specifically coming back to Council for action, but the Finance Committee voted unanimously to forgive the outstanding loan from the city.
Thank you. And the Ordinance Committee met today. Ms. Sneddon, do you have a report?
Yes, thank you. We considered mobile home park conversion regulations. This is an ongoing process. The next plans are to plan civic engagement meetings with fact sheet available in Spanish translation and with meetings that will be also translated in Spanish. We'll be coming back with, or City Attorney will be coming back with some more data for radius relocation considerations and looking for ways to coordinate possibly with the removal of the AUD overlay. All of those will be coming back to Council in the future.
Thank you. That moves us to number 10. Ms. Clerk?
Yes, number 10, resolution in opposition to Proposition 6 to preserve transportation funding. Recommendation the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara in opposition to Proposition 6 on the November 2018 ballot to prevent the loss of transportation funds generated by Senate Bill 1.
Very good. Mr. Casey, is it Mr. Ford today with our report? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. I'm Matt Four. I'm a senior assistant to the city administrator. I'm here to, as Ms. Gorman read, offer for your consideration a resolution of council in opposition to Proposition 6. This is a statewide ballot initiative on the November ballot that would essentially strip the city, as well as all the other jurisdictions in the state, of the transportation funding that was adopted by the state legislature in April of 2017 through SB 1, Senate Bill 1. So this will be a quick presentation, just talk a little bit of background, the implications of what it means to the city and to the region to lose that funding, and then we'll talk about the specific resolution. So as I said, SB 1, Senate Bill 1 was enacted by the state legislature in April 2017. It's often referred to as the gas tax. It added a 12-cent per gallon tax and also other vehicle-based registration fees. In total, throughout the state, it's estimated to generate about $5 billion annually statewide. There's a formula then that allocates that money out to the different jurisdictions throughout the state. And this is a significant amount of funding. It's part of the overall package of revenue that we looked at to maintain the city's infrastructure needs, and it's certainly a complement to Measure C. These are categorical funds that are used for road repair and maintenance, but its loss would be substantial to the city. Just by way of other background, and Proposition 69 was then passed by the voters in June of 2018. What this did is it stated that this transportation funding in SB 1 must be used for fixing roads and not for other unrelated projects. So the legislature allocated or passed this funding for a specific purpose, and the voters affirmed that they wanted this funding used for transportation purposes. As I said, this would be a substantial revenue stream for the city, and although SB 1 does not have a sunset provision, just looking at the next 10 years, the city, based on the formula, would stand to receive about $2.6 million on average per year. If you look county-wide, this number is about $200 million, and I show the county-wide number because of the regional transportation projects of which the city is a part, so its loss is amplified, and as you can see. So Proposition 6, what is it? It's a constitutional amendment ballot initiative. It's qualified for the November 6th ballot, and as I said, it would repeal the revenue increases that were enacted by the legislature as of January 1st, 2017, which would also include Senate Bill 1. And as you saw from the previous chart, would result in a substantial revenue loss to the city and the county. The implications, I think, are threefold. The first is a localized impact, and again, our estimates and looking at state revenue estimates as well as League of Cities and folks that we're a member of, it's about $2.6 million annually just to the city. It would also jeopardize funding that's already been approved for existing projects like the Highway 101 expansion, totaling about $400 million, the Las Positas multi-use path, about $15 million, and other rail projects, the regionally about $22 million. And then finally, the regional impact, as I said before, about $200 million estimated over 10 years county-wide with all of the jurisdictions. So with that as background, then we are bringing this resolution to you for consideration to formally oppose Proposition 6. It would then allow the city and the mayor to be a signatory as a party that is formally opposing this proposition. So with that, we'll take any questions. I have with me Brian Demore, the city's engineer. If you have specific questions on specific projects. And also member Margie Kern from SB CAG is here, the executive director. I should note that SB CAG and MTD recently adopted similar resolutions in opposition to Proposition 6 as well.
Thank you. We thank Mr. Damore and Ms. Kern for being here. And we'll start with questions from Councilmember Friedman.
So going back to slide 7, it shows the impacts. My specific question is in regards to funding for Highway 101 widening, and what would happen if Prop 6 passes, and would the widening project be able to go forward?
Ms. Kern, please come up. And you can.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having me. The answer to your question is it depends. If the SB-CAG board finds it's still a priority, then it could move forward. What we estimate, if we were to rely on existing revenues prior to SB1, we get about $2 to $5 million a year, depending on the state budget. So the amount of time it would take to accumulate the loss of the $400 million, do the math there. It could be a few 100 years or 80 years, or what I've been saying is beyond 50 years to accumulate the necessary funds to complete the project as it is programmed today. And that is just the phases, half of the project, phases 4A, B, and C. We still have yet to fund D and E, which would be beyond the funding time frame that we're looking at in our long-range transportation plan.
So just to clarify, if Proposition 6 passes and we were to lose that funding, it would seriously impact our ability to widen Highway 101.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
Ms. Kern, while you're up there, can you tell us about the rail projects as well? That's
Sure.
the expertise of your agency.
Sure. In addition to the 101 funding, which was $416 million that was funded through the competitive programs, we also received some funding to improve rail service along the corridor. Locally, we received $22 million, but the corridor itself received over $100 million in the north of LA corridor. So there's going to be improvements not only at the Goleta train station. We received $13 million to basically redo the Goleta train station, as well as fund additional service that would complement the rail service with transit. The peak hour rail that we started this past April, we wanted to provide additional transit so it makes it easier for folks to make those decisions. And it also funded a transit facility, a regional transit facility to maintain our buses for MTD as well as our regional transit, the Clean Air Express as well as the Coastal Express. So it's a plethora of projects that we receive funding for, and also bike projects that you saw on your previous slide. So in Santa Barbara, we have quite a bit to lose if SB1 is no longer in effect. But also statewide, you have improvements throughout the state that are needed, and we would like to see benefit from those improvements as well. So the state has a lot to lose.
Thank you. I have more questions. I don't see any other lights on. Mr. Damore, the Las Positas Modoc Road multi-use path, I'm looking at the list of projects in our council agenda report. So that's to encourage recreation and commuting, right? But also safety. Can you tell us about the safety improvements related to that project?
Yeah, so the Las Positas Modoc Road multi-use path is aimed at getting bicyclists and pedestrians off of the road, especially on Las Positas. You have a road that has a posted speed, I believe, of 55 miles per hour. I don't see too many families with children going down that road just due to the sheer speeds that exist there. So the purpose of this project would be to provide a safe, separated space for bicyclists and pedestrians to be able to commute or go to the beach. Henry's Beach is right near the end of Las Positas. And we have funding that depends on the continuance of SB1 in order to do the construction.
There was a fatality in recent times, I think, along that stretch.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the Union Pacific Railroad Bridge over Cabrillo Boulevard and the Olive Mill Road, US 101 roundabout. Can you tell us how our residents would benefit from completion of those projects?
Sure. I think we have a couple of exhibits. Okay. So depicted here is a rendering of what the UPRR at Cabrillo project would look like. This is looking towards Montecito from the bird refuge side, and it provides bike lanes, sidewalks, where presently I don't think we have the existing condition that's there, but it is extremely narrow. The bikeway essentially ends at the bird refuge, and if you want to get to Montecito, you've got to navigate through a very narrow corridor that has a lot of vehicular traffic. So this project would widen that bridge and provide ample space, not just for the pedestrians and the bicyclists, but also for the vehicles too, because it's a congested corridor for all users.
And Olive Mill?
Olive Mill, pictured here. This one's not quite as far along on design, but this would install a roundabout at the east end of Coast Village Road, and it would improve the level of service at that highly congested intersection. And both of these projects really work hand in hand with the 101 project.
Okay, very good. We have some public comment speakers. Linda Foster, you'll be followed by Bonnie Raisin, and then Tony Krigdowski. Come on up. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, everybody. I'm not going to pick apart everything that's going on, but I do feel that the audacity of you guys taking taxpayers' money for your time to be deciding on a yes or a no on Prop 6. I think you should be neutrally displaying both the pros and cons of this to the public. I think the issue of deciding on a no vote at this point in time goes against what the taxpayers want or should be deciding on their own schedule of reading their ballot books and whatnot to go to the ballot box. I really feel you guys are at cavalier or at a point of just audacity to be thinking that you want to go ahead and tell the whole world, Santa Barbara, whatever, that we stand on a no vote. You guys, I would respect you a lot more if you were more neutral on these types of issues. Yes, you're going for it because of these budget problems. There have been many gas tax raises in the past that we voted on, many, many, many. Where has all this money? I think it's a budget disbursement problem. It comes down from Sacramento. But you guys have money available, but it's all being twisted up, buried in other issues that are in the same proposition of no. I don't believe this. Governor Brown passed this at night, the last issue of the evening up there in the legislature, and we need a right to vote on this. We don't need an influence from you guys. We only need to decide this on our own as taxpayers. Having said that, I want to read from the California Taxpayers Association.
Okay, I'll just give just a couple of sentences.
Okay, it's quick anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gas tax hike will cost California families $700 a year on average. People with long commutes will pay even more. The gas tax was never voted on by the people and was approved despite record budget surpluses.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Ms. Raisin, come on up.
Good afternoon, City Council, Mayor Murillo, and City Council. You know, it's tax. We just passed a 1 cent sales tax in Santa Barbara. But getting to the real issue of the the gas tax. I will not be convinced that if we get more money through our gas taxes, that it's going to be spent the way it should be spent. I do not want to indicate that I have no confidence in local jurisdiction, but I don't know what would happen when it gets to Sacramento. And I also think that it's going to be hard on the people who commute from Ventura. 12 cents doesn't sound like much, but a lot of those people live and work in opposite directions, and they're going to bear the brunt of that. We have a 4% unemployment rate approximately in Santa Barbara, and 12 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but if these people are commuting someplace for work, it could add up to a lot. I just think that the people of California have been taxed beyond belief, and I think it would be grossly unfair, and I think it would do our city proud if we decided that Proposition 6 is not a good thing. I would encourage you to think carefully before passing that. I had some other thoughts on this, but right now I just want to say, too, regarding the widening of the freeway really quickly, we promised to have commuter lanes a long time ago, and that never happened. So, you know, there's a lot of promises with our money, and
thank you so much,
it
Ms.
doesn't all
Reza.
happen. Thank you.
Okay. Final speaker, Mr. Craig Dowski. Watch the clock. 2 minutes goes by real fast.
City Council members. I'd like to talk about Senate Bill 1. Of course, it raised the tax 12 cents a gallon. And they have an excise tax on it. Right now it's 11.7 and it's going up to 17.3. They have a transportation improvement fee, probably averaging 125. It says here 25 to 175. And also what they have in there is a hidden legislature's gas tax bill is a clause that allows the tax to automatically increase every year without a vote of the people. And they're going to adjust it by cost of living, which is 2 to 3% right now. Also, I like to take just a Lompoc commuter, right? 120 miles. They get 25 miles per gallon, okay? It's going to cost them $139 a year. And it's going to cost them $70 more for the excise tax. And then it's going to cost them another $125 for the transportation improvement fee. That comes out to about $335. And they assume the average cost of this is going to be $500 per year. The gas taxes we pay now for roads, streets, highways, and bridges are being diverted to public retirement funds. The retirement funds are going bankrupt. They need these tax funds to survive. I don't care what Proposition 69 says. They're going to transfer those funds. The state is also using our taxes for a bullet train, right? Its cost started out at $60 billion. Now it's $73 billion. And it's $13 billion overrun so far. We should stop building this bullet train and use the money to fix our needs, which are roads, highways, and bridges. We should not burden our poor and working class with another tax when the state has plenty of money for this unwanted train. And don't be fooled by people that claim there's no money to fix our roads, etc. They have money to transfer from gas tax to public employees' retirement funds.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kurdowski.
Okay, I'd just like to close it then.
Go ahead.
The gas tax hike must be repealed. The state shouldn't have this much absolute power to raise taxes on everyone without a voter approval.
Very good.
Thank
Thanks so much. That closes public comment on that. Back to the council. Mr. Hart.
Excuse me, I'd make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Okay, very good. Is there a second? A second from Friedman. Rouse, your light is on to the motion,
And
sir?
to the motion, Madam.
Mr.
Madam
Hart
Mayor.
first.
Yeah, I think it's important to correct the record. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about this issue. The California state gas tax has not been raised since 1994. It has not been increased to keep up with inflation since 1994. So the purchasing power of the gas tax today is less than half of what it was originally. Anybody who operates a business knows that you can't sell your product for a price half of what you sold it for 25 years ago. The legislature, by a 2/3 vote in the full light of day, increased the gas tax to keep up with inflation, raised it to the level that it would have been today. It had simply been increased for inflation. Historically, that's how we have paid for roads. Every economist in the country would say the most fair, the most reasonable way to pay for road repairs and to pay for transportation improvements is to have people who are driving cars pay a gas tax to do that. For 100 years, that's how we've paid for transportation projects in the state of California and the country. So having the gas tax at an appropriate level that generates the money necessary to make the improvements in our transportation system, to keep our economy going, to keep people employed. The people who are probably the most strong supporters of the gas tax increase are the folks who live in Ventura County who would like to see the 101 freeway widened in the near future. That project is under construction today. As Ms. Kern described, the state of California has granted $416 million to the next 3 phases of that project. If Proposition 6 passes, that money will go away. We will not have that $416 million. We'll be on a path for that construction project to take generations to get back to the place we are today. The choice is very simple for voters, and the reason we are taking a position here today is to make that very clear to the voters. They have a choice to continue paying the tax that they've been paying for the past year that is just the inflated CPI increase on the historic gas tax and accrue $2.6 million to the city of Santa Barbara on a permanent, ongoing basis for local road repairs, $12 million countywide for local repairs, $22 million one time in rail improvement funds, and $416 million to get the 101 project moving as fast as possible. The state has also committed to providing additional funding in the next round of state gas tax grant funds to complete that project. So we have a choice to go down that path or to go down the path of having all of that money gone, stop all of the progress on all of those transportation improvements stopped, and be in the situation of having transportation revenues gridlocked for another 20 years. I think the issue is very clear and simple, and I'm glad we're taking this position today.
Okay. Mr. Friedman, did you have anything to add to your second of the motion?
I'll be supporting the motion.
I know, Mr. Hart, you covered a lot there. Mr. Rouse.
It's a tough act to follow. So every year we get a ton of propositions, we get a ton of legislative proposals, controversial candidates, policies, all over the country, all over the state, and some here in town. I don't want to go down the path where we're going to be reviewing proposition after proposition, law after law, candidate after candidate that are outside the jurisdiction of the city. I'm not going to sit there and be teased out of my position on any proposition. I have very strong feelings about a lot of the propositions. I'll be glad to discuss them with anybody, anywhere, anytime, except from up here. So I will, Madam Mayor, be abstaining from this vote.
Very good. Mr. Dominguez.
I also will be abstaining for many of the same reasons. We get onto a slippery slope when we're deciding which ballot measures we're endorsing. This is a very complicated issue, and I think there's a whole variety of reasons why people might vote for or against it. And they're all very valid reasons. As Ms. Raisin pointed out, this is a regressive tax. It really impacts the working poor and working families at a great rate. The goals that could be achieved that I think this bill was supposed to do, or this ballot measure was supposed to do, there's other ways to do it. And we've actually increased vehicle miles traveled fairly consistently over the last couple decades. And I don't see this really stemming that. I think we've seen an increase in the size and weight of vehicles, which is what damages the roads. So I think we should really look at a comprehensive set of legislation that would help with all these issues. Some of the things that were flashed up there, the widening, that's been controversial. Some people support it, some people are against it. When Caltrans did their EIR, we submitted a letter that pointed out several of the deficiencies in their EIR, and the deficiencies were centered on the impact this would have on our local community cars getting on the freeway and cars getting off the freeway. It actually creates a safety hazard because it backs cars up onto the freeways, and so people are driving at full speed and then there's a backup onto the freeway, and these issues haven't been addressed. So that was just an example to show that there's a lot of nuances here, and I'm concerned with issues when we have council members who have vested interests or who work for organizations that are going to channel hundreds of millions of dollars. I think you should probably abstain from this if your organization is going to be channeling a lot of this money. It just doesn't seem fair to put all of us under the pressure to vote. It's a small community. We all have friends and family, and we want to make sure that people vote based on the merits of the issues.
I'll be supporting the motion myself. I think that we can disagree up here without saying that other council members are wrong or that their values are wrong. I'm satisfied with the Highway 101 environmental review. I think a judge, a court in our fair land here has agreed. With all due respect, we don't make opinions on a lot of propositions. This is really rare. I think it's because of all the benefit that our residents will receive from this. And also regionally, the residents over in Montecito and the people who work in Santa Barbara but don't live here, the commuting. So there's a lot of benefit, and I'm thinking of those folks. So I'll be voting yes, and I see Ms. Sneddon has her light on.
Thank you. I don't have much more to add other than that. I do have a discomfort with supporting or not supporting any particular proposition. Other that, in this case, it has such a direct impact on our city's ability to maintain our roads and to keep our infrastructure safe and our mobility high, and that does affect all income levels, and including low income levels. So for that reason, and because it has such a direct impact to our city's ability to continue and complete projects that we already have planned, I will be supporting the motion.
Okay, very good. Ms. Clerk, will you take a roll call vote, since we know some people are respectfully abstaining? Thank you.
Certainly. Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Abstain.
Mayor Pro Tem Rose.
Abstain.
Councilmember Hart.
Aye.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Mayor Murillo.
Aye. So that's 5 yeses and 2 abstentions. Okay, very good. That closes this item. Thank you, staff, for coming out and giving us information on that, and our public speakers as well. The next item, number 11.
Item 11, adoption of ordinance to amend the CalPERS contract for police management cost sharing. And the recommendation is that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing an amendment to the contract between the City of Santa Barbara and the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System.
Thank you so much. We have a staff member whose name I don't know. I'm ashamed of myself. What's your name, ma'am?
Madam Mayor, City Council members, my name is... sorry. Madam Mayor, City Council members, my name is Carla Torres. I am the benefits analyst in the HR division.
Thank you, Ms. Torres.
And yes, this ordinance was initially introduced during the September 11th council meeting and is intended to approve an amendment to the city's contract with CalPERS, allowing the members of the Santa Barbara Police Management Association to pay an additional 4% towards their pension cost on a pre-tax basis. Adopting the ordinance today would be in accordance with Government Code Section 20471, requiring at least 20 days between the adoption of the resolution of intention and the adoption of the final ordinance. And I welcome any of your questions.
Any questions from our council? I don't see any. Mr. Casey, are there any No public speaker comments, and we'll entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Very good. Mr. Rouse is moving the item forward. A second from Councilmember Snedden. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Thank you. That looked unanimous. Okay. Item number 12.
Item 12, air service development efforts at Santa Barbara Airport.
Okay, we have some airport staff coming up. Ms. Zackerson, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Deanna Zackerson. I'm the airport's business development manager, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Kevin Shore. He is our air service development consultant from Campbell Hill Aviation, one of a small number of firms that helps airports like us increase their air service. All right. To get us started today, the term air service development might not be self-explanatory, so I wanted to try to break it down in a couple of pieces for everyone to understand. It is about selling your airport to the airlines, but it is also about selling your region to the airlines. And we're thankful that Santa Barbara is as well known as it is, but there are still many opportunities for us to educate about what is truly unique about our region to the airlines. It's also about competing with other airports for air service. And it's not just with other airports for new service. It's with airports that already have service and convincing them that it's a better idea to offer new service in Santa Barbara as opposed to expanding service somewhere else that's competing with us. We help the airlines by doing their homework for them. We do the analysis. We show the profitability. We show the feasibility. And then, they ask questions, check our homework, but it really helps to encourage them to really take a look at Santa Barbara if we help them along just a little bit. Why we really do this, it is, of course, to assure that our region, and we are the largest airport between Los Angeles and San Jose, that our region has the air options available for both business travel and for leisure travel. And it's that fuels the economy in our region, and that's what's important to us. The economic benefits of air service. The University of California, Santa Barbara did an economic impact study last year and found that the airport supports 1,500 direct jobs. That's direct employment that's supported by the airport. There's another 1,000 jobs or so that are supported indirectly through purchases and services that take place and wouldn't take place without the airport there. Airport businesses spend quite a substantial amount of money in the local community every year, and that's quite important to us. Now, when a new airline comes to the airport, that's really a big boost for us because we will increase our revenues on rents and other user fees. We also sell more food in our restaurants. We rent more rental cars. That increases our revenue and, of course, in turn, increases jobs. So annually, that economic benefit is somewhere around $205 million a year. So it's pretty impressive and pretty important. And it's important for the airport because I think, as we all know, owning and operating an airport is a very expensive endeavor. And many people don't necessarily know that the airport needs to be self-sustaining. It does not receive local tax dollars to support operations and investments. So we have many important investments that we need to make on an annual basis. I believe in the last year we invested about $2 million into the facility. We invest in properties that in turn generate money, like is shown in the photo on the lower right. That is the new electrical equipment for the hangar facility on the northeast corner of the airport. It was 50 years old, needed to be replaced. So those types of investments generate money. We also make investments in our infrastructure, like our runway project that we completed this year, a complete rebuilding of our main commercial runway. Now, for a project like that, we can receive some federal funding for that. However, we also must match, we need to produce matching dollars of nearly 10% of locally generated dollars for that. So it's important for us to earn our keep, so to speak. We work with an air service consultant, and it might not be self-evident why we do that. Kevin's a great guy and all, but we do it for other reasons than that. Airlines are very data-driven. Essentially, they ask us to show them the money. And Kevin and others like him most often have worked at airlines. And so they have analyzed routes for airlines. They know what airlines are looking for, and they can help us with that. They can also help us keep that sort of 30,000-foot view of the competition, the whole view, which we can't necessarily keep track of on our own. And it is actually a much easier way for airlines and airports to operate. There's over 400 commercial airports in the United States. Airlines have limited bandwidth. It's much easier for everyone if someone like Kevin is calling them rather than someone from each and every airport calls. So I'm going to pass to Kevin to talk about the thing he enjoys talking about the most, and that is data.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Shore, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. If you look back to 2007, you could see at that point the airport was handling about 850,000 annual passengers. Between that point and 2016, because of changes in airline strategy, skyrocketing oil prices, and an economic downturn, we saw the loss of service over that time. So by 2016, we were handling just over 600,000 annual passengers. But what's happened since June of 2016 is we've seen a significant rebound in passengers, most of that fueled by the return of American to Dallas and United and Alaska using larger aircraft. So for the year ended August of 2018, the airport actually has seen 756,000 annual passengers. If we look at this August compared to last August, we're up 14%. If we look for the year ended August 18 versus 2017, we're up 9%. Year to date, we're up 10%. So the numbers are looking really good, and we're expecting to see this trend continue at least through this year and into next year. And we think that by the end of 2019, we should get back to the levels that we were seeing in 2007 and 2008. If we look at seat capacity over that time, you won't be surprised to see that the graph is somewhat similar. Back in 2006, 2007, we had almost 1.4 million annual seats at the airport. And again, because of the factors I talked about before, that dropped to about 800,000 seats. But now we're back to just over 1 million seats. And for the year ended, for calendar year 2018, we should end with about 1,050,000 total seats, or about 1,400 seats per day in each direction. So that's up about 33% since 2015. Looking at service at the airport, we're always curious as to how much capacity each airline is providing at the airport. And if you look at the number of departures on the right there, you can see that United provides about 2/3 of the departures at the airport. They're number one at the airport, and they have been for a long time. If we look at capacity, though, they're just over 50% of seats. Why is that? Because they're using smaller than average aircraft. American's number two with 22% of departures and about 1/4 of the seats. Alaska only has 10% of departures, but 16% of the seats because they do use significantly larger than average aircraft. And now we see our new entrants, Frontier and Sun Country. Frontier has about 2% of departures, but 5% of seats because they use aircraft that have a lot of seats on them. And then Sun Country with 1% of departures and 3% of seats. So the airport now has a better and improving mix of the network or legacy airlines like American, Alaska, and United, but also now low-cost airlines like Frontier and Sun Country and Contour, who's going to join us later this month. So how do airlines make decisions? How do they decide where to fly? Well, it really is all about the numbers. It really does come down to route profitability. And by route profitability, we're obviously talking about revenues and costs. Some of the other things that they need to be concerned about is the availability of aircraft. Even though some of these airlines might have 700 or 800 aircraft at their disposal, we really need the aircraft of the right size, and we also need the aircraft in the right place. If United has aircraft availability in Newark, but they want to add capacity in Houston, that doesn't necessarily help all the time. And we also need The other issue is pilots, of course. As we all might have heard, some of the smaller airlines are having a pilot shortage issue. So there's been issues with some of the regional carriers to find pilots because they all want the higher paying wages at the network carriers. And they don't have the conduit of pilots like they did years ago from the military. Other things that they need to consider is financial strength and stability. If an airline is struggling at this point, they're going to be a lot less willing to take on risk by starting new markets. So we always have to take into account how well is an airline performing. And oil prices are a big part of that as well. As you all know, oil prices have been increasing over the past few years. So the airlines are getting much more concerned about the price of oil, especially for longer haul flights. And then competing expansion priorities. The airlines can't expand everywhere. For example, United said they want to expand more in the middle of the country, in Denver and Houston. Well, if we're talking to them about growing to LAX, for example, where they're not as interested in expanding right now and don't have the gate space to do so, we have to take those kinds of things into consideration. And then competition. Competition's very important. Every airline is thinking, if I start that new route at Santa Barbara, is someone going to compete either by starting new service or by lowering prices on existing service? So this is just a handful of the things that the airlines need to consider when they're looking at new nonstop service. Being an air service development consultant, there's nothing we love to do more than create route maps like you see here. This is what we do for fun. And there's nothing that we like more than adding more lines to the route map. And as you can see, we've got 10 nonstop destinations now from Santa Barbara, which we're very excited about. As you know, Alaska flies to Portland and Seattle. American flies to Dallas and Phoenix. United flies to Denver, Las Vegas, and San Francisco. The exciting news is that we have had 3 new carriers within 2 months either start or announce new nonstop service in Santa Barbara. And that's quite unusual for an airport of this size. So we are absolutely ecstatic. And that includes Sun Country, who started in Minneapolis twice a week. They'll be flying. They started August 16th. Their season will end December 9th, and we hope that they'll be back next year. All indications are that they'll return next year. They're using 737s with 126 seats. And then Frontier returned to the airport. As you may recall, Frontier served the airport about 7-8 years ago. They just returned on August 21st. They're flying 3 times a week to Denver with an A320 with 180 seats on it. So we're starting to see significantly larger aircraft than we have in the past, which of course is great news for everyone at the airport. And then a new airline called Contour Airlines is going to be starting nonstop service to Oakland on October 16th, once a day with a 30-seat regional jet, and Las Vegas 5 times a week starting October 18th. And these are markets that we have been talking to carriers about for a long time. And Contour is very excited because within the first 24 hours, they sold 5% of all of their available seats on both of these routes. So should these routes perform well, we assume we'll see more flights to these cities as well as new cities. So one of the things that we look at as one of the indicators of route profitability is essentially how full are the flights, or something called the load factor, which you all might have heard of before. And again, this is one of many indicators that we look at for route profitability. This tells us how full flights are, but this, of course, doesn't tell us how much are people paying to get on the airplanes, which is another key component of route profitability. So the routes in Santa Barbara range anywhere from 61% full for United to San Francisco, 67% full to United to LAX, on up to 83% full for Alaska to Portland. So the average is about 71%. And if you look at the 71%, you're probably thinking, well, that's not that great. But because fares here are higher than other airports, the airlines are more than happy to have 70% full airplanes. In fact, the Santa Barbara domestic fare is 37% higher than the average domestic fare for all of California, which probably might not surprise some of you. I'm going to hand it back to Deanna.
Alrighty, and now since we're talking about costs from
Ms. Zackerson, Mr. Rouse has a question, I think, for the consultant.
Well,
oh, no,
you might
for
have
staff.
been ready just to address it because we were just talking about that. So is that where you were going?
Airport costs?
Yeah, and I had a couple other questions for the consultant, but I want you to go ahead and make your point, because I think we're...
All right, thank you. With regard to airport costs and airline costs, it might be helpful for some to understand what it costs an airline to how those costs are divided to service a route. And essentially, the largest share of that pie for an airline is actually the cost to buy or lease an aircraft, service that aircraft, fuel it, and then staff it with pilots and flight crews. So that's the biggest cost in there. When it comes to airport costs, even though most airports will offer initially some form of incentive to start new service, essentially that slice of the pie is really a very small slice. It's about 5%. And one of the metrics that we use to look at costs and compare airport costs, we call it cost per enplanement or cost per boarded passenger. So in the United States, the average cost for an airline from an airport cost is about $15 per boarded passenger. And as you can see, Santa Barbara is right in there in that average cost. So hopefully that's addressed your question. If you're happy to elaborate if you need.
Well, yeah, but you were talking something about 37%?
Yes.
Higher?
So the average fare, the average domestic fare here in Santa Barbara is 37% higher than the average domestic fare of all California airports combined.
Is that because we're not a hub? Is that more of that reason, or is it actually, hard costs?
It's more because that's what the market will bear.
That's right. That's
Yeah, and limited competition. Now, as airlines like Sun Country and Frontier and Contour build a presence here, we will see that average fare come down eventually. I'm sure it already has, actually.
Well, to your presentation, you were mentioning earlier the economic benefits of the flights and coming to Santa Barbara and whatnot, which obviously we're very interested in. And it was interesting to see your the graph about the enplanements, and it seems like there's a bit of an elasticity or a bit of a lag time between when the airlines perform and when our local economy performs. So as we follow things like sales tax and bed tax, it seems like we're ahead and then behind. Is that a typical kind of curve? Is there a one-on-one relationship with that, or is that what you find as you look across the country?
I don't think that there's any actual heuristic that I could think of that looks at the start of airline service as to when we see the actual economic impact. There's no question the economic impact sort of ramps up as time goes on.
Right.
So you won't see it as much at the beginning of service. And of course, it depends on the kind of service. Is it a service that is bringing in business passengers here, that's bringing in more tourists, or is it more of a service that's taking Santa Barbara people elsewhere for vacation? So a lot will depend on the actual kind of service as well.
And last question. Everybody asks me this every time I talk to a consultant. Sacramento, anywhere on the horizon?
We talk to airlines all the time about Sacramento. There's a lot of interest. It is just a question of finding that right airline that has the right aircraft type. But that is by far one of the destinations we hear about most from people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Rouse. There's more presentation left, so there'll be more answers. So,
all righty.
Sackerson.
One of the key components or one of the key concepts in air service development is called a catchment area. And we have the ability to see from data that we get from the Department of Transportation that the airlines provide, we can see where our resident travelers are going. It tells us a lot about what passengers we should be capturing with our air service and which ones we aren't. If you are in this catchment area, which is indicated with a dark blue line, Santa Barbara should be a viable alternative for you. Now, what's unique to our area a little bit here is that you'll see there's also a secondary line that shows drive times to the south, a 60-minute line and 120-minute line to the north. And that's a pretty unique characteristic of Santa Barbara, that it's not just distance, but it is actual time and effort to get to another airport. We have a secondary catchment area on outside of that where you can see where we capture passengers to maybe a lesser degree than just our primary area. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. But really, one of the key arguments that we make with the carriers is that Santa Barbara is not Los Angeles. The airline planners that may be sitting in places like Chicago and Dallas can look at a map and think, Santa Barbara looks pretty much like it's close to Los Angeles. And we all know that that is not true from the standpoint standpoint of it's 100 miles, but it's 100 miles of driving misery, as we all know. And so we really try to spell that out for the carriers, that this is a unique component of our marketplace and makes Santa Barbara particularly powerful to address our particular audience. Okay, Santa Barbara's catchment draw, just to show you this quickly so you can see where the density is from where we pull our passengers. We pull a lot of passengers south to Carpinteria, but even in areas close to other airports like Santa Maria and San Luis Obispo, and that's because we have the most robust service of all of those airlines. All right. This right here is another bit of evidence to an air carrier, the strength of our market. The number of households, the household income, level of education, which isn't shown here, and disposable income. All of those things are indicators of a population that has the ability and the desire to travel often. So Kevin now is going to talk a little bit about where our catchment area travelers are actually going and how they are getting there.
So here we see a list of the top 12 domestic destinations from the catchment area. For example, a market like Seattle, where we have nonstop service, the total market size is about 112,000 annual passengers. Only 66,000 of those passengers are actually using the Santa Barbara airport. So 41% are leaking to other airports. So in an ideal world, everyone who lives within our catchment area would use the Santa Barbara airport. But again, because of a number of different factors, 41% of the people going to or from Seattle from our catchment area are going to other airports. If you look at a market like New York, where we don't have nonstop service, about 94,000 annual passengers are the total market size. Only 30,000 are actually using the Santa Barbara airport. And obviously, those people who are doing so would have to connect at least once to wherever they're going. So in that case, 68% of the market is leaking to other airports. On average, about 64% of our domestic traffic uses other airports. Why do they do that? For lower fares, better schedules, better aircraft type. They have a frequent flyer loyalty to a certain airline. It could be any number of factors, but on average, about 2/3 of the passengers who should be using the airport are driving to other airports. One of the more interesting cases is Las Vegas. Our total market size to Las Vegas is 90,000 annual O&D passengers. Only 4,352 are actually using the airport. So 86,000 annual passengers from the catchment area going to or from Las Vegas, or 95% of the market, are going to other airports. So when an airline looks in their database, they say, well, the Santa Barbara, Las Vegas market's only 4,352 people. We can never make that work with nonstop service. So it's then our job to say to them, look, there's 86,000 potential passengers that you're missing. Start nonstop service. A good number of those passengers will come back and use the airport. And once they put those numbers together, then it makes sense how they can make nonstop service work in a market like Las Vegas or Oakland or Sacramento or some of the others that we've talked about. When we look at, and we've used the term leakage, again, people from our catchment area who should be using the Santa Barbara airport but are driving to LAX, driving to San Luis Obispo, Burbank, and any other airport. In the markets where we don't have nonstop service, so Las Vegas, New York, Washington, Salt Lake City, on average, 60% of the passengers in those markets are driving to LAX. Only 19% are using the Santa Barbara airport. 9% are driving to Burbank, 8% are driving to San Luis Obispo. But if you look at the markets where we have nonstop service, like Seattle, Phoenix, and Denver, on average in those markets, we're retaining 40% of the passengers. So our capture rate actually doubles in the markets where we have nonstop service. We go from capturing 19% to 40%. And about half of those passengers who are driving to LAX will now start using the airport for nonstop service. And again, this is a big part of the business case that we make to the airlines, that with nonstop service, we can mathematically show you how many of the passengers will use the Santa Barbara airport for that nonstop service. If you look at our top leakage markets by destination, the top 10 markets, you can see that Las Vegas, like I said before, is about 86,000 annual O&D passengers. We have 64,000 annual O&D passengers going to the New York area. Salt Lake City, we have 37,000 annual passengers going to Salt Lake City that aren't using the Santa Barbara airport. So again, when we talk to Delta and we say we'd like you to serve the Salt Lake City market again, and we show them how many passengers are not showing up in their data, it becomes a much more compelling business case. But there are still markets where we have nonstop service where people are going to other airports. So if we look at a market like Denver, where we now have over 4 flights a day, 4 on United and 3 flights a week on Frontier, we still have 60,924 passengers using other airports. Now, as we start getting more data from Frontier, I'm assuming that number will go down. To the Bay Area, where we've got anywhere from 5 to 7 flights a day right now on United to San Francisco, we still have about 48,000 annual O&D passengers using other airports. So again, as Contour starts that new service to Oakland, we're hoping that number will come down as well. And I will now hand it back to Deanna.
All right, I'd just like to quickly touch on our incentive program that I mentioned previously. It was recently revised. It was originally put into place in 2009. I can tell you that most airports, if not nearly all airports, have some form of incentive program. It's expected from the air carriers. We provide incentives to new nonstop service. So if we can get a new nonstop route, we will be willing to relieve landing fees for an air carrier for up to 12 months. Now, for example, a 737-800, a landing fee for one of those flights probably is in the neighborhood of around $500, $575. So a relief of a fee like that for a certain period of time is an enticement for a carrier, but we earn from it in the sense that we are earning more money by bringing in additional service, and of course we make money other ways than just the landing fees. So it's still, all in all, it's very much worth it to do it. We also invest in local marketing, so that's trying to get locals in those seats, and we collaborate with Visit Santa Barbara to try to get those inbound tourists into our market. So as we close, I just want to touch a little bit about our objectives, because we do have some specific objectives that we work on. And those are, we're fairly agnostic when it comes to the air carriers. We just look for carriers that are the best suited to provide a particular service. So you can see we do have the service that we already have is noted there. We are adding Oakland service, obviously, on the 16th of October, but we are still targeting more Bay Area service because we believe that there is still significant demand there for that. So San Jose, for example, would be a great fit for us. Las Vegas, you saw the data there. That market will by no means, that need will not be met with the new service. So we're still targeting more service for Las Vegas. And then we're looking more to the Midwest, good connection points. Salt Lake City, we have had service to Salt Lake City before. It is very, very frequently requested by people that call us, email us, see at the Lemon Festival, for example, a very popular destination. And then in addition to that, Chicago. Chicago is also another market we've had direct service to and is very frequently requested. Now, I know you saw the leakage that was evidenced with New York. That's a little bit of a special case. We don't have that as a strategic objective just because the New York airports are so constrained. They have slot controls, so we don't really deem that that's a realistic alternative for us. But the other markets, absolutely, we work on in a very focused way. So as just a concluding note here, if you haven't seen this already, this is some snippets of our marketing program for 2018-19. These in particular are internet ads. So these are interactive ads that if you are someone with an IP address in our catchment area, this will be served, and you're looking for travel, this will be served up to you as an alternative. If you click on it, you will go to the airport's website. If you're so enticed and click on one of the air carriers' links off of our website and buy a ticket, we're able to follow that process all the way through. It's great data for us because we can show the airlines when we're making investments in marketing what that return on investment is. So with that, we'd be happy to entertain any questions.
It looks like Councilmember Friedman has a question or a comment. Do we have public comment slip? So, yeah.
So my question gets back to leakage, why people would go to other airports. So you mentioned earlier that the rates here are 37% higher. So
On average.
On average, compared to other in California. So have you ever done any studies on what that sweet spot is where someone would be willing to pay more to fly out of Santa Barbara, but once it hits a certain level, they won't? I'll give an example of that's a personal example, is if I wanted to fly with my family to, say, Washington, D.C., and it costs, if you can find a good fare, I've seen them, but $300 or $400 round trip from L.A. I've seen a $400 round trip from L.A. to D.C. You see them from time to time.
That's impressive.
But even if it was $500, and then you come and you try to get just the connecting flight from here to LA to DC, it could cost you $800 or $900. And so with a family of four, all of a sudden you're paying $250 more a ticket. It's not worth it for me to fly here. So I choose not to. But I've also seen flights where I'm flying from here to somewhere else, and the difference is $100, and I'd be willing to pay that, because that's that $100 is the value I have of not driving through that traffic nightmare. So have you got to that sweet spot of where that is, or have you done any studies of that?
The airlines have very sophisticated pricing and revenue management systems that can essentially tell them that once a price hits a certain ceiling, they're going to see demand drop off. And they change prices many, many times throughout the day based on the number of bookings they get at what level. So we haven't personally done any kind of elasticity study for the Santa Barbara market and the individual markets, but the airlines effectively do it for us in terms of how they set their prices.
Well, I would just say personally, and I've talked to other people about it, if you could look at that, because I think their model is a little bit off, because the prices here are, especially if you're just trying to connect to LA and the difference. You could pay more for the flight from here to LA than you're paying to go from LA to DC. And so if there is a way you can look at that, because I think if we tighten that up, we could actually reduce that number. Because that's probably the number one thing I look at, is the difference between flying from here versus LA to most of my destinations. And I don't fly that often, but when I do.
Right. And it's interesting because that difference to add on that LA segment to DC could be $400, as you said. To a market like Dallas, it might only be $100. And, again, it just comes back to, how much can they squeeze the market until they stop booking tickets. But it's something we can definitely look into. Thank you.
This is an informational item only, so if you have questions or comments at this time, I don't see any more. A thorough presentation, Mr. Shore and Ms. Zackerson, thank you very much. Thanks for the good work you're doing on behalf of our city and our airport.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close this item. For the folks waiting for the appeal, we have one more item ahead of you. Right. And Ms. Clerk.
Item 13, Stage 3 Drought Update.
Okay. Mr. Hagmark, whenever you're ready.
Madam Mayor, council members, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, and here to provide another drought update. I'm going to dive right in. A drought status. Well, obviously, we haven't seen any reprieve this summer, so we remain at a severe drought condition based on the U.S. Drought Monitor that's provided on a monthly basis and updated. And we have, as of the end of September, wrapped up the 7 driest consecutive years on record. So we are now in year 8. As you may recall, when we started this, we had, in 2011, adopted a 6-year plan to deal with dry conditions. So we have certainly surpassed that 6-year planning horizon and continue now to plan out for the next 3 years. So needless to say, the city remains in a drought emergency. Continues to be a highlight of the community's performance on conservation, which is really remarkable. A lot of communities have seen conservation drop off, and we've seen it stay consistent, which is really impressive. We had 29% conservation for August, which is really difficult when it's warm, and our 12-month running average sits at 31%. As we probably heard before, the water usage of this community right now is on par with what the community was using in the 1950s. Just really, just really remarkable, figuring we have twice as many people living in Santa Barbara as we did in the 1950s. Water sales, just keeping an eye on it. Again, this is an unaudited revenue tracking, but we're just keeping an eye on it. and our revenue has been tracking consistent with what we were projecting, so we're feeling really good about where we are with our rates. Basically, we're feeling we've hit a stable position. Our water supplies, a few things to update on that. So Gibraltar sits there with 3,600 acre feet of water in it right now. Really got some disappointing news back. We've been doing bathymetric surveys, so this tells us the volume of the reservoir, and we've been now kind of in this groove of doing them on a yearly basis because of the fires and damage that we've seen from those. And we've just got back information showing that we lost 654 acre feet of capacity as a result of the Thomas Fire in the first year alone. I expect if we do see some rainfall this winter, we will lose additional capacity. We are working with FEMA since it was declared a disaster, particularly the January 9th storm. And we're working with them to try and see if we can't recoup some costs for the damages as a result. We got a great letter of support from Cal OES, and we are working with Congressman Carbajal and Senator Feinstein's office to see if they'll also send a letter of support, seeing if we can't get FEMA to step up to the plate on this. Water quality remains challenging at Gibraltar. We're able to bring down a small amount of water, really blending it down in order to meet our water quality standards, but really the water's starting to degrade pretty quickly because of the temperature, and so we're hopeful we get some decent rainfall this winter to kind of flush some of that stuff out of the reservoir. I'll talk a little bit later how this impacts our supply strategy. Cachuma has 61,000 acre feet of water at 32% of capacity. The city has actually a pretty sizable chunk of water in there right now. It's sitting in about 8,600 acre feet of that. The downstream water rights release wrapped up, and just want to put another plug in for the cooperation this time around. We reached out to them early on, and they gave us a guarantee that they would not release over 10,000 acre feet, and they actually came in at 8. It was really helpful in helping us to plan. Without knowing, we would have had to run ahead and put the barge in, the emergency pumping barge, and because of their commitment, we were able to defer that till next spring, and actually because of their release, hopefully we've been able to defer that until late summer. And if we get some rainfall this winter, it may be able to push it out a whole nother year, which should be really huge for us. We did, unfortunately, get a late hit from reclamation. This is a big frustration for costs that were incurred by the Bureau going back to 2015. These were costs related to the emergency pumping system for the fish. And if you may remember, the valves on the dam broke, and they had to replace those too. And they're finally catching up with those costs. Those costs ended up being around $1 million, and of those costs, about $550,000 were attributable to the city. And right now, where we stand is we have budgeted money for the pumping barge, and we're in a position right now where we could take that money and go ahead and pay this deficit and avoid approximately $12,000 in interest. Or we could wait until the spring when we know whether or not we're going to do the barge. Where I'm pushing forward, unless the council has any issues, I'm going to go ahead and make that payment, pay off the deficit that is owed, clear that off the books, and then if we need that pumping barge, I would return to the council for appropriation of money from reserves to fund that, unless there's any issues with that. That's what I'd like to do. I want to bring something to your attention, and we do have an item scheduled for City Council on October 23rd, but this is just a preview of that. So we have been working with the county on a allocation for this year. The member units, consisting of Carpinteria, Goleta, Montecito, and ID1, had been doing a lot of modeling of the reservoir to see what water was actually available for allocation. And we had arrived at 40%. And we had given that to the county and said, we believe there's plenty of water in that reservoir to do a 40% allocation. The county requested an extension from the Bureau because they didn't like what we were requesting, and subsequently submitted with our request an alternative request, which was not consistent with our contract. Our contract with them says they are to act on behalf of the member units, and we were acting jointly, and they chose to throw their weight into the hat saying we don't agree with the member units 40%. They did not provide additional data. They just said that they didn't agree with our calculations. And Reclamation took this information and sided with the county and ultimately ended up with a 20% allocation. We're really frustrated with this and believe the county is in breach of our contract with them. And so we'll be back on October 23rd to speak more with the City Council on this and how we would like to respond. As far as imported water, there hasn't been much of a change. We've actually been using a lot of imported water in the reservoir. We'd actually been building it up going into the summer, and we've drawn it down extensively. You can see there we only have 45 acre-feet of state water remaining in there. And that's why we have 8,600 acre-feet of Kachuma supply in there. So it's just juggling our different supplies. It all passes through Kachuma, but we will once again this year be looking for this coming year. If we don't get adequate rainfall, we'll be looking to purchase additional water, and we do have money set aside for that. Our current water debt is 3,700 acre-feet of water that we have to pay back. Groundwater, we did operate our wells this year from May through September, and that was partially because we were unable to really get water out of Gibraltar. We kind of supplemented it with groundwater, particularly from this lower storage unit basin. We kept an eye, and we did not see a significant change in the seawater intrusion that we were monitoring. We also got the final USGS Sustainable Yield Model Study back, and it's a rather thick document. Ms. Dyer, our water supply manager, is finishing up her review, and as part of the November update, she's going to provide how that may change our use of the groundwater basin going forward. As far as desal, the plant continues to operate, and we continue to work on wrapping up the elements of construction. There's just outstanding deliverables that they have, but overall, it's huge success to have that. We had a great open house. We were able to provide tours to over 200 residents, and really it was great to have the positive support out there. Senator Jackson showed up on Saturday as well. She wasn't able to join the Wednesday public meeting or the media meeting, but really, really overwhelming response, positive response. Really appreciate that. As far as recycled water, we continue to be in this position of limbo. A facility is unable to meet its design capacity. There is an item, I think, next week on the agenda to talk some more about this. The secondary aeration project is wrapping up construction. We expect that to be done in early 2019. And we believe that is one of the key components that should allow us to reach the full capacity of that facility. I think I advised last time we were here that we were having issues with operating the facility. We had some of the piping you can see in the picture there break. Again, we suspect it's a design issue, but we had that pipe break. We had it break twice, and when it did, pieces of pipe went flying, and we're fortunate that we didn't have staff working around there. So we took the time to actually secure the situation so that if it broke again, at least staff wasn't at risk, and it did take some more time to get the facility back up and operating. So it was offline for almost 2 months there. Anyway, the plant is currently online and operating, and we hope it will continue to do so. As far as water supply strategies, I'm going to show you 2 graphics here, and I just want to talk about the 2 different scenarios. So one was, and this was in May, we had provided these to council. One was, this was the scenario if we had Gibraltar, we're able to utilize water from Gibraltar, and then the second one is without. In this scenario, we were recognizing that in 2021, a potential shortfall of about 800 acre-feet. Again, pretty small if we get some decent rainfall to fill that gap, but that's what we're going to be taking a look at, and we're planning to update this for November to reflect a combination of what's basically, we ended up, this is the second graphic. This was a graphic we looked at with no Gibraltar, and in that case, it had about a 1,300 acre-foot deficit in 2021. We're going to bring back a revised one, but basically we were able to operate the wells this summer, so that kind of minimized some of the impacts. So we're going to end up somewhere in between these. I suspect somewhere around 1,000 acre-foot deficit out in 2021. Again, something that is manageable to tackle if we get some reasonable rainfall. And if not, we will also be preparing for a discussion about what the next increment of desal expansion looks like. So at this point, if there's no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline Ward, who's going to walk you through some of the outreach.
Ms. Ward.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Madeline Wood, and I'm the Water Conservation Supervisor. And I'm here to share our latest episode of our GardenWise TV show. This is our long-running garden show that's about 30 minutes each episode. It began in 2006, and to date we have 34 episodes that have been created. It's produced by City TV, along with the City Water Resources Division, the County Water Agency, and Goleta Water District. And the episodes can be viewed on YouTube, Cox Channel 18, Cox Channel 20, or Comcast Channel 23. Our newest episode is titled, I'll Take Plants for 400, Alex, and it highlights a WaterWise Jeopardy game, as you can see here, where contestants are in a thrilling game on competing with their irrigation and landscaping knowledge with our host named Alex Trebeck. We had to do it. Also, we have a great segment on learning how to design and maintain a FireWise garden that both saves water and helps protect your home from wildfire. And that is with our wildland specialist, Ann Marks, and a local garden designer, Ariana Jansma. And then we also have a design segment with local landscape architect and author Billy Goodnick, and he teaches us how to pick out plants at a nursery, and that is at Seaside Gardens right there. And lastly, we have a segment on attracting beneficial insects to your garden with Corey Wells of Lotus Land, who takes us through the insectary garden at Lotus Land that has a lot of native plants to attract beneficial insects. And we're here for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Mr. Hart, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a kind of a comment and a question too. We have been not watering De La Guerra Plaza since the council made a decision about conserving water strategically through the park system. And, you know, obviously I understand we are still in a very severe drought and we're asking folks to conserve water, but we're asking folks to be smart about how they use water and to be selective and strategic, and the public is performing incredibly doing that. And I think it's time that we think about De La Guerra Plaza strategically and reconsider the decision to not water that park. It is the front yard of Santa Barbara. We have a lot of community events there. This year in particular, there's been a lot of community events, and the amount of water that we're talking about is symbolic water. It's not real water in the context of the city's drought situation. And short of re-landscaping the entire plaza, with a large capital project that would put drought-tolerant plant out there, I can't see us, solving that problem and returning that to some semblance of presentability without just watering the lawn. And I'd just like to know what staff thinks about that. There are other parks that are being watered. I know the Parks Department had a very specific, well thought out plan as to which lawns and turf areas in the city parks to let go in response to the drought and which ones not to. And this was, I think, included as a let go because of the as a symbolic gesture to the community. And I think we don't need symbolism anymore. We need to actually save water where it matters in a smart way, not a symbolic way anymore. And I think De La Guerra Plaza is the lead example of that, where we ought to change course. So there's a question embedded in there somewhere about what would be. Let's see.
Ms. Bjork, what are your thoughts on De La Guerra Plaza grass?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director. I certainly, one of the factors about which lawns to keep alive and which to allow to go golden had to do with how much community use, whether they were an active recreation space. I certainly think that De La Guerra Plaza qualifies as an active recreation space. There's a lot of community activity happening there. Reestablishing the lawn would take more than just watering it, but we will talk to Parks and Recreation about that. I certainly know that the administrator has been interested in that, so we can pursue that and take a look at it and see what it will take to reestablish something more than what's there right now, because I agree it's gone beyond golden.
Mr. Walker had filled out a speaker slip, but he's gone. So you can ask questions or make deliberative comments. Did you have anything else to say, Mr. Hart? Okay, then Ms. Snedden, you're next.
Thank you. Just I hadn't planned on commenting on that, but it does tie into we are in unprecedented situation starting year 8, and I think when we look at we've talked about this at Water Commission also, but not just status quo of maintaining, but what it would take to actually rebound. This is me speaking, not Water Commission speaking, what it would take to rebound some of our resources. And so when we talk about symbolic gestures or things like lawn, from my perspective, lawn is dead, and we're not coming back from that. And a symbolic gesture and a real gesture might be planting something drought tolerant, planting a new type of example of what it is that we would hope the rest of our community would do. It's not enough, in my view now, to just conserve even to 1950s levels if our lake is still at 30% or lower. That's me speaking. In response to the presentation, I just really appreciate all of the work that the Water Department does in managing this very diversified water portfolio. And if we could just go back to that last slide about the water supply strategy. And just maybe we could highlight some of the individual brackets in here. So this is assuming no Gibraltar, that it's no longer useful or that it have to be blended to the point. And what are some of the other areas? We have the water purchases. They're larger now, but expected to decrease. Could you just maybe go through these each individually?
Right, so this was based on the water we had purchased already, and we're planning to deliver over this time period here. So this is the water that we had on hand. And again, this next winter we'll look at, but this also recognizes limitations on our delivery system. So it's really a combination of state water and water purchases. This right here kind of fills our capacity in the state water pipeline so that we're always maximizing that. So that could change if we get a larger state water allocation. Then we need to purchase less because the pipeline will be in essence full, and we get about 30% of our water supply through that. I do want to point out this, and again, this was put together really in May. We try to do updates to our strategy in November and May, kind of to reflect how the summer went and then again how the winter went. It's usually our pattern that we're getting into here. But this looks like we used a lot of Gibraltar water. This was water used early on in 2018 water year. So remember last year we had a pretty good supply of water in Gibraltar, and so that reflected a lot that was imported prior to January 9th when we got all the mud and debris flows that came into Gibraltar and basically ruined what was in there. So that reflected a large portion of that. Realistically, we're looking at just basically Mission Tunnel flows going forward. So that's what this particular scenario looks like here. We do have some Cachuma. Next year, we're planning to actually use quite a bit of the water that we have in Cachuma that we've actually been storing up, planning to use. So that's important. So what's the discussion that's going to heat up is evaporation. So as you may recall from prior years, the evaporation formula for Cachuma kind of blows up when there's no allocated water left in the lake, except for what's carryover. And so we're going to be sitting down to, again, negotiate, hopefully come up with something reasonable, because we have a lot of water in that lake that's at stake. And again, Kelly has made some assumptions as to what those evaporation formula will be, but if it ends up being something very drastic, it could change what's available to us there. And then we have our recycled water here, and then of course desal, which is really making up a good chunk of our supply now at 30%.
And on this figure, does this show budgeted the 40% allocation or now the 20% that's been renegotiated?
This, I believe, Ms. Dyer was pretty conservative and used probably 20, because in May we didn't know. It wasn't until we did the math that we thought that 40% was reasonable. Yeah, and is assuming the use of carryover. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I just want to emphasize, I'm in agreement with you that it was not the county's proper position to write a letter that was counter to the member unit's interests and what our request was for that 40%. So I'm happy to hear that that will be coming back so we can discuss our response to that. That does affect our overall water allotments and what we can use. And if you could maybe say more about the evaporation. I mean, if you're going from your 40% and you're not using it and you're just using 20%, and so we're just losing the rest to evaporation, or how that affects the actual water use.
Yeah, we can definitely bring back a little more discussion on that, but it's the evaporation, the way the county's kind of taking it. They have a vested interest in the park at the lake, and so they're interested in preserving the water in the lake for recreational fishing and stuff like that. So they are wanting to see more of the water left in the lake, and indeed, if you leave that water in the lake, in 3 years it's gone due to evaporation. And so we would prefer to have that allocated and see that it's used rather than just sit here and watch it evaporate. What's challenging is typically when the reservoir is not quite full, but certainly above 100,000 acre feet, there's enough evaporation on Cachuma to supply a whole nother city of Santa Barbara. So the evaporation that occurs at Cachuma is pretty significant. And so we're interested in certainly maximizing the use of water there. The smaller the surface area of that lake is, the lower the evap gets. And so there is some strategy to managing that lake and, fully utilizing it. And so we could sit here and just leave the water there and it will evaporate.
Thank you. And then just one more comment. I just want to echo that how grateful we are to the downstream interest for working with us cooperatively and sharing information so that we could delay that barge deployment and really conserve our water, but also plan fiscally for our future. So thank you.
I do want to prevent just a little update. Next time we come back, we are going to be revisiting the impacts of development. So we in 2016 presented what the impacts were. We're going to be bringing back updated numbers on what the impacts have been to water supply, and also just again revisiting our regulations. We're not going to be looking for a decision, but just be looking to refresh everyone's memory of where we were with those and what options we have available. Certainly if we don't see any rainfall, we're going to be talking about implementing or at least revisiting some of those options in the new year.
Good. Mayor Pro Tem Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I really agree with Mr. Hart's point in terms of what we're doing symbolically versus what we're doing practically. And as we try to rebound from the malaise of the storms and the mud flow and all that, and we're having the economic downturn, and we need to reestablish our aesthetic. And I think part of that would be David Laker Plaza. And to that end, are we plumb for recycled water at? Me get a shake head, no.
No.
And is there any hope, or is there any practical application to like a purple truck system where we could water remotely, at least to establish and do our street tree programs and whatnot before we start losing all the assets that are just basically live in landscaping?
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, so the Parks Department is using recycled water for the watering of trees, but city trees. However, it probably would not be effective for a lawn like that, in particular, given the constraints of having to truck it around and then also when you would use it. It works for the street trees typically because they have those slow release bags that they put it in and they're able to get it all into the ground. But we can sit down and talk with Parks about alternative options, but I think that the costs would kind of kill that. A typical lawn, you can correct me, uses about 4 feet of water in a given year. So that's 4 feet of water over that entire area is a significant amount of trucking.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of establishing and then being able to intermittently use potable. But I mean, it's one of those things where Mr. Hart's correct. It is the front door to the town, and we need to reestablish that. We know it's symbolic. Mm-hmm. The amounts are still minuscule comparatively. So, thank you.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question. I remember there being a report by KUIT about cloud seeding. Is that something that is still being done, or was that just an experiment?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, yes, we participate with the county in a cloud seeding program. Again, this last year, because of the Thomas Fire, we actually canceled that contract. We did not want to seed any storms and cause more damage. But typically, we are participating in the cloud seeding program run by the county. And again, there are very small windows in which that cloud seeding program works, and you pay to have the aircraft or ground-based seeding basically on standby for those particular events where you have the right moisture and temperatures to really make it effective.
Okay, and what impact, if any, has the recent legalization of marijuana had on the water supply?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, we don't really have a way of monitoring that. We aren't aware of any commercial growers in town, so I don't anticipate that it has had much of an impact.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Councilmember Friedman.
Well, first, I want to thank the residents who have continued to show that you've taken the drought very seriously, and for your conservation efforts. I think it's quite remarkable that we use the same amount of water now with double the population as we did back in the 1950s. So appreciate that. And then also our partner agencies for working with us to really achieve water management that has allowed us to get to this point and still have our water available. And then also our staff individually. I'll start with De La Guerra Plaza. I agree with all the points that have been made, Councilman Hart and Rouse, but I also think Councilmember Sneddon raises an excellent point too, is what's the future of that and the example we can set. So I am interested just to see what information you bring back to us. I think that's what this is, just information gathering for us at this point. No decisions have been made, so I just want to clarify that point. And I was going to speak to this at the Council Committee assignment reports, but I think it's relevant to the discussion now, and it's last week, Central Coast Water Authority had our monthly meeting. And just like the Kachuma Project water, there are a lot of moving parts to our state water and allocation, and also the delivery of state water that's coming to Kachuma. And among some of the things that are going on there are the reassignment of the contract. Right now, the county manages the contract for the state water agencies, and there is discussions on transferring that into to the Central Coast Water Authority. And at this point, the Department of Water Resources has stated in writing that they're open to that. So now there's going to be some discussions at the local level here of the implications of that, and having a Central Coast Water Authority and the member agencies controlling that contract with the state relating to our state water. There's also the issue, when you look at this chart, you'll see that state water is a very important part of our water supply, and it's going to become more important, especially as the drought continues. And so there are discussions now also about extension of the state water contract, which only runs through 2035. So there is a proposal statewide to extend the contract, and for us locally it would be another 50 years. And so there's a lot of moving pieces in that. Has a lot of financial implications, but also our ability to continue to receive state water, and which has been a real lifeline during the last drought. And then also another issue that is taking place is the Department of Water Resources has changed the formula for how they contract out the costs they allocate to pay for the maintenance and of our stretch of the State Water Project. And through this new formula of how they're allocating it, there are significant increases in costs that are associated with it in the millions of dollars annually that are taking place. So Central Coast Water Authority staff are engaging with Ernst & Young to really analyze those numbers. And so we're just trying to have get a better understanding of what those numbers are, how they were calculated, why, and true those up, and then work with the Department of Water Resources to really understand those numbers. And then, and I think there was, and lastly, this will be helpful to the public, is that staff at the Central Coast Water Authority is working on an easily understandable fact sheet that will be available on the Central Coast Water Authority website that kind of breaks down state water, how it's allocated, our historical averages that we've been able to use, and how much water has been delivered, so that we can really understand how the cost of state water, but also how much we've been used, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on how much we've got, how much we pay for it. So just as we're moving through a lot of pieces, and we're having an item coming related to that on October 23rd, there is a lot that's going on. And as some of these get fleshed out, I will be asked. I've talked with the executive director of Central Coast Water Authority to come and give a presentation to our council. But we need to have some of these issues resolved first, because I think it's important once they're resolved to understand those. So we're trying to find a date, and it might not be till next year, but it is on the agenda to have an update for us here and the public to really understand Central Coast Water Authority and what it does. So just wanted to bring that. And my other question, because I know it will come up from the public, is related to Gibraltar, or I guess my question, I didn't say other question, is desilting. Can you speak to, if it gets full, is there, would we desilt it, or what do we do there? I know that we're going to get that question from the public, so I'd rather see if we can have some type of response now.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman. Yeah, that's a question that actually comes up quite often, and it has been looked at. The county's looked at it. We've looked at it. And it's well in excess of $100 million to remove. At the time, we looked at about 2,000 acre-feet of silt, and that didn't even tackle the environmental issues of where that silt would go. Is really just the trucking costs and removal costs. So COMB is embarking on a study right now to talk about sediment management, or to study sediment management and to look at different options. Because one of the issues that's out there is, once Gibraltar is full, in theory, that sediment then, Kachuma will now see the full effect of that sediment. I mean, Gibraltar has acted in many ways like a backstop for that sediment, but once it is full, all of that will be passed down, and Kachuma will start to see that. So there is a need to develop a longer range plan for sediment management, but unfortunately, mechanical removal is probably cost prohibitive. One of the things, though, I think that's helpful to know is we do the radial arm gates that we have there. Those gates are about 20 feet tall. The way that the sediment would build up in there, in theory, we would retain about a 20-foot storage capacity in there, which is probably around 2,000 acre-feet of storage. Because as those gates open up and we get a big flow, it pulls from the bottom, so it kind of naturally will flush and keep the sediment. So, long term, we still see that Gibraltar will have some level of storage. It's just going to continue to diminish until it kind of hits that status quo.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Thank you. So thank you, staff, and also the regional partners that were mentioned. And I also want to thank Councilmember Friedman and Councilmember Sneddon. I think people often don't realize that our council acts as our water district board. A lot of cities have a separate district board. And in particular, these two members have taken on more responsibilities, going to a lot more meetings, and they've been appointed as liaisons. And particularly in a drought, that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of stress. Again, all you heard that they mentioned in negotiating with other cities and bodies, it's really time consuming. So thank you both for doing that work for us. Regarding De La Guerra Plaza, I noticed there's some architects and land use people in the room for the next issue. I think this would be a great place to have a competition and see which one of you can design the best idea. A lot of small pueblitos around the state like Santa Barbara have a Zocalo or a civic center that has permeables or otherwise have a hardscape for lots of events. So I think we all agree we need to have something done there. Maybe removing the parking that was added years ago to really open it up for residents to use, not residential. That's a slightly different purpose. But there's a lot of different ideas, so it'd be great to see some of our brilliant architects and landscape designers compete to figure out the key to re-energizing that space.
Very good, thank you. So thanks so much, and I guess the bottom line is everyone to continue conserving water. Mr. Hagmark, is that what I'm hearing? Our residents, our businesses, and thank you very much for the report. We'll close that item. And does anyone need a break? I think we can keep going. Okay. The next item, Madam Clerk.
Item 14, appeal of the Single Family Design Board's project design approval and final approval with conditions at 917 Paseo Ferrello.
Okay, so this is a land use appeal. It is a quasi-judicial hearing, and it's a particularly serious responsibility of our city council, and there are specific rules and a format. It'll start out with council members disclosing ex parte communications. Staff will make a presentation. We might have remarks from a design review board representative, questions from the council. The appellant will get a chance to do 20 minutes, and if you don't use all your 20 minutes, I'll keep track, and you can use it again to answer questions or do a rebuttal. Questions from the council, a presentation from the applicant, questions from the council, public comment, and then come back to us for deliberations. So I will start asking my colleagues if there have been any ex parte communications. Mr. Dominguez?
I ran into the former owner, Mr. DiPaolo, and had a short conversation with him.
Okay. Mr. Rouse?
I also received a phone call from Mr. DiPaolo, former owner.
Okay. Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I had a phone call with Mr. DiPaolo last week as well.
Okay. Mr. Friedman?
Check the Neil DiPaolo.
Okay. Thank you for that. Staff presentation. If you're ready, Ms. Unzueta.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. The purpose of today's hearing is to consider an appeal of the Single Family Design Board's project design approval and final approval with conditions for alterations to an existing residence located at 917 Paseo Ferrello. This vicinity map provides some context with respect to the neighborhood and where the project site is located. The project site, by the way, is located in the Lower Riviera neighborhood. The lot size is approximately 10,500 square feet, and currently existing on the site is approximately 3,000 square foot, two-story residence and an attached garage. The project is a request from the applicant to permit unpermitted alterations, including the glass railing on the existing second-story deck, glass garage doors, an air conditioning unit, a retaining wall, and a shoring wall. The site plan shows the property with its existing development, and encircled in blue is the location of the deck and garage doors. This is an architectural design comparison of the project that was approved in 2011, specifically the south elevation showing the upper story deck with the cable railing on the 2011 approved plan, and the 2018 proposed as-built plan shows the glass railing with the glass doors. These are some site photos of the property. On your left is a view from the backyard looking up to the second-story deck with the glass railing, and also you can see in that photo the garage doors. On the right is a view from Paseo Ferrello looking down towards the lower yard. On your left, viewing the property, or in this case the residence, southeast at the west elevation, And on your right is the view looking northeast at the west elevation. I'd like to just briefly give you an overview of the history of how this project got to you today. So just bear with me with respect to the dates here. In 2011, the SFDB reviewed alterations to the existing residence, and as part of that approval, a second-story deck with cable railing and a solid wood panel garage door were approved. In 2014, a final building inspection was conducted, and at that time, the building inspector signed off the glass railing and the glass garage doors. And this was done in error as it was not approved by the Single Family Design Board, and it was not part of the approved plans. In 2015, the property sold to the current owners, Mr. and Mrs. Brinkman, and at that time, it was noted that, let me just back up, a complaint was filed also regarding unpermitted work, and it was noted at the time of the inspection of the enforcement that a zoning information report was not prepared for the property when it sold to the current owners. In 2016, the zoning information report was prepared for the property, and at that time it was discovered that the glass railing and the glass garage doors were in violation of the approved 2011 project approval. An enforcement case was initiated to abate these violations, and in 2018, the property owner submitted an application for review by the Single Family Design Board requesting approval of the unpermitted alterations. The board reviewed the project and found that the glass garage doors were acceptable primarily because of the large overhang that exists and therefore shaded the doors and not an issue with respect to glare. However, the Single Family Design Board could not find that the glass railing was consistent with guidelines pertaining to materials and colors, and therefore was inconsistent with the guidelines as well as incompatible with the neighborhood. In July 18th of 2018, an appeal was filed by the applicant because of the denial of the glass railing. The appellant contends that the glass railing is a permitted improvement because it received a final inspection sign-off by the building division. He also claims that there's vested rights to retain the glass railing due to this approval, and therefore it is exempt from further SFDB review. Approval of architectural design and materials are only within the purview of the city design review bodies or the city council on appeal. In reviewing and considering this project, the Single Family Design Board considered guidelines, specifically guidelines with respect to materials, and these guidelines encourage that they be compatible with the neighborhood and blend with the natural setting. And specifically, the guideline with respect to glass material indicates that this is not a preferred material, especially in the locations that are highly visible, excuse me. Because of this, or based on this, the Single Family Design Board found that the glass material was inconsistent with the guidelines in neighborhood. And they determined that the cable railing that was approved as part of their 2011 approval was the more appropriate material for the deck. Specific to this appeal, as the appellant contends that the glass railing is approved because of the sign-off or the building permit sign-off and certificate of occupancy, The California Residential Code states that issuance of a certificate of occupancy shall not be construed as an approval of a violation of the code, and also that certificates presuming to give authority to violate or cancel provisions of this code or other ordinances shall not be valid. So in this case, the sign-off or the building permit certificate of occupancy is not valid. In addition, changes in the field require an approved revision to the building permit, as well as review by the appropriate design review board, in this case, the Single Family Design Board. And specifically, our municipal code states that final inspections shall not be approved or issued on any city permit until all conditions imposed by any board have been completed or met. For your consideration this afternoon, the Single Family Design Board determined, after review of the application, that the proposed alterations, except the glass railing, complied with the neighborhood preservation findings and approved those alterations. If the council is able to make all applicable findings of the neighborhood preservation ordinance, the appeal should be denied. If the council cannot make these applicable findings, then the appeal should be upheld. And I have here the neighborhood preservation findings for your review. One is consistency and appearance. So will the project be consistent with the scenic character or enhance the appearance of the neighborhood? Compatibility. This is indicating that the project is compatible with the neighborhood and is appropriate for the site. Quality, architecture, and materials, and specifically the second sentence that indicates that materials and colors maintain the natural appearance of the ridgeline or hillside. Number 4, we do not believe is applicable, as no trees are proposed for removal on this project. Health and safety and welfare also is a finding, and it just deals with the whether the project will appropriately protect and preserve the public health and safety and welfare. Oh, excuse me. Number 6 is a good neighbor guidelines, and this has to do with basically being a good neighbor with respect to privacy, landscaping, noise, and lighting. And then public views is the project. The project preserves significant public scenic views of and from the hillside. So these were the findings that the Single Family Design Board applied to the project and could make them for all the alterations that were as built, except for the glass railing. Staff recommends that Council consider the Vanguard Planning Incorporated appeal of the Single Family Design Board's project design and final approval with conditions for exterior alterations at 917 Paseo Farillo, and also to direct staff to return to Council with a decision and findings reflecting the outcome of the appeal. With me today are the chief building official, Andrew Stuffler, and also our city attorney, Tava Ostringer, is at the staff table, and also Katie Momolsky, who is the staff to the Single Family Design Board. We also have the Single Family Design Board member, Brian Miller, who would speak to this issue as well. That concludes my presentation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Dominguez, you have a question at this point?
The considerations, the way it's worded with the findings, if council is able to make all applicable findings, the appeal should be denied. And I'm wondering, is there 2 sets of things we're looking at, the proposed alterations minus the glass railing, that would be true of? And is it different with the glass railing? Or how are we working in these neighborhood preservation findings.
Madam Mayor and council members, I'd like to ask staff if perhaps it's a typo and maybe they were interspersed inappropriately. I believe it would be if the council's able to make all the applicable findings, then they should grant the appeal. And if council cannot make all the applicable findings, the appeal should be denied. That's where the question is, so.
Okay, I understand.
Ms. Ostranger?
It's a typo. If council can make the applicable findings, then the appeal is upheld.
Okay.
Granted. I don't like to use upheld because that seems like you're upholding an opinion, the original opinion, which to avoid any ambiguity. And then the next one is if council cannot make all the applicable findings, the appeal should be denied. So I'm just going to write that into slide 17 just to keep myself in order. Thank you.
I think the council agenda report had it right. So, okay. Mr. Miller, would you like to make a statement representing your design review board?
Madam Mayor, Council, I'm sure that you went to the site and saw what it looked like and saw the staff report. You have pretty much formulated your opinions. But the big question is it okay to approve something that was initially not approved before the design review board because it ended up being built after the fact and given a permit? We've been getting several projects as of late where the review board has been in a very difficult position, being confronted by an owner or client or legal counsel where they recently purchased a residence or later find out that certain building elements were not approved by the SFDB, but were passed through the city inspection process, given a permit, but then later needed to go before the review board again seeking forgiveness. In most cases, we acquiesce. But in this particular case, the board felt due to its high visibility and location on the Riviera that a glass railing is not acceptable. How do you define a unique character of Santa Barbara? What is it about Santa Barbara that gives it its unique character? That is what we're up against. That's kind of like our mission statement. How do we define the character of our community? Should we allow this rather simple glass railing through and let it slide through the cracks? How many more cracks in the future are we going to let through? I, like all my other board members, are volunteers. Aside from my little stipend, I don't get paid for the time it's taking me to do this. Personally, I don't care what kind of a railing there is. But the bigger question, I think, is how do we maintain the integrity of the design review board's decisions if, as Garrett argued, once the city gives its permit, design approval becomes irrelevant? If that's the case, that there needs to be some serious review of the whole design review process and how the city relates to it. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Miller or for staff? Ms. Sneddon and then Mr. Dominguez.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we'll address this now or after we've heard more, but there's a considerable amount in the staff report and about whether this was built. I guess I have questions about once an inspection has been signed off and it's as built or as it appears at the time of the inspection, and somewhere in the staff report, and even in the presentation, mentioned that as an error that happened.
Yeah, it's very awkward. What happened is, and we had another project where the building was built, and this other project, and the contractor went bankrupt. So someone came in and finished it, but didn't apply. Didn't do what the SFD recommended it. The inspector came out, signed off on it. They got the permit, but then they got a zoning information report needing to, a new owner came in, bought the house, not knowing what they bought themselves into, and then it was an infraction, and they had to come back to the SFDB again to get that reapproved. So we had to make it okay that what was there, though we did not approve it, was okay. Otherwise, then they are forced to take it down and restore it back to its original pre-approved decision that we made in that case. And in this case, that's kind of similar in that situation with this railing. And there was also the garage door and some other issues. And we just felt in this particular small area, and we thought this was pretty lenient because of the high impact of the visual of seeing it and the reflectivity and the kind of the quality and the character of the Riviera, that the cable railing was more appropriate.
So then I suppose I have a question for our staff or legal counsel. So for the final building inspection, what is the standard for that? And if that isn't in agreement with what the single family design board review was, is that now that it's been signed, or just not even in this case, in general, what is our responsibility on that?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Cullen.
Yeah, Councilmember Sneddon, let me take a shot at that. The appellant here is asserting that because we approved it, the community is stuck with it. That body of law is called estoppel, E-S-T-O-P-P-E-L. The courts say that you can hold somebody's mistake against them, so to speak, when the person you're trying to estop, the city, knew what was going on. So we knew there was a glass railing there. That the city intended its conduct to be acted upon, approving that glass thing. 3, and this is the tough one, that the other party, in this case the appellants, is ignorant of the true state of the facts. Now, we have no idea what information these owners obtained from Mr. DePaula when they bought it. So the council doesn't have any evidence as to whether or not these owners knew what was going on about that glass. And then finally, the current owners would have to rely on the mistake by the city inspector to their injury. Now, if you get through all of that, there's still a special rule for the government that applies. Why? The courts don't want the general public to pay the price for the mistakes of city employees, for the most part. Okay? So even if all 4 of those things happened, then the injustice that would result from not upholding the estoppel must be of sufficient dimension to justify any effect on the public interest or public policy that would result. So there's lots of ways to look at it. I can't direct you, but if the policy here is that we don't want hundreds or thousands of people seeing shiny reflective surfaces up on the hills, then you're talking about a great number of people being negatively impacted by the mistake of one individual employee. And that's a situation where the courts tend not to hold the government to an estoppel. By way of contrast, you've all heard me hand-wringing about the fish market. And we're dealing with a smaller group of people there that are negatively impacted. So the argument here from the appellant is that the city should be bound by that erroneous approval under an estoppel theory. And that's an option for you, but you can also decide that the impact on the community is too great to warrant it.
Okay, so other lights. Councilmember Dominguez has a question at this point. Mr. Gorin, thanks.
I was going to ask, the point Mr. Miller made was that the single-family design board does put in a bunch of time at their own expense, considerable time and resources. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure we recognize that in terms of upholding what they do. And I want to maybe talk to you about issues unrelated to this particular case as a liaison to that board to make sure we make any changes we do need to make to city policy to make sure that the actions you take are respected and enforced. So maybe at some point we can sit down. But I was going to ask you how often it happened, but I realize that's not really relevant here, so I'm not going to ask that question. So
yeah, it's an important thing to bring up, and I think it's one of those things that kind of slid through and no one really notices, and now it's sort of rearing its head and it needs to be seriously addressed. So
okay,
yeah,
very good, very good. So we'll go to the appellant. Come on up, and as I said, you have 20 minutes keep an eye on the counter there whenever you're ready, Mr. Gordon.
Can I wait till my presentation gets put up here?
Be nice and fair.
One thing for sure, we're all going to be dreaming about the words glass railing after today. I'm Jarrett Gorin. I am from Vanguard Planning. I'm a land use consultant, and I represent the appellants, Mark and Lee Brinkman, the current owners of the house. This is a picture of the house. And I want to start off by saying that I appreciate what the Single Family Design Board does. They are volunteers. I think they make an overall positive impact on the community. I go before that board probably more than any other board. And I always feel like, for the most part, they give us valuable direction. And I also appreciate their frustration that in some cases, their direction hasn't been carried through in the rest of the city's implementation process. I want to draw a quick distinction, though. The project that Mr. Miller's referring to, where the contractor changed everything and then it had to go back and they approved it, those homes never received a final occupancy clearance. Those homes had to come back because they only had temporary clearance, and they came back because they needed to in order to get a final occupancy clearance. And they're still on the way to do that right now. In this case, as we'll see, it's a completely different situation. So the staff report sort of abbreviates some facts and embellishes others, and I'll cover that. My presentation is structured to answer issues that are raised in that report. So the first one, which is important, is, did the city review this? The staff report seems to say, no, it wasn't reviewed by the city, and therefore this was issued in error. And I think it's really important to look at what happened here. So this is what they say. It wasn't shown on plans by the SFDB. Okay, that's true. But then they go on to say, or plans reviewed by the city as part of the building permit process. And that's not accurate. This is an all activities summary, and this is the most detailed report you can get out of the city about everything that's happened on any given project. And what you can see here is that the former owner called for a final building inspection on April in 2014. And this is a list of items of why he didn't get that final sign off that day. And if you go down to number 6, here the inspector has clearly identified and called out this glass railing and requested documentation thereof, engineered to document. So what happened next is the previous owner had to supply an engineering report for this railing, and it's a detailed report. It has pictures of the railing. That's a picture of it. And that's the same as an architectural detail that would be on any plan set submitted to the city. And if we take a look at that, here it is. It shows how it attaches to the deck. It shows the Simpson ties that have to hold it. That thing has to be able to withstand 200 pounds of force, and they need an engineer's report to say it, that it does. And so that's what the city reviewed, and here's the railing that's built. This is exactly the same thing, which shouldn't surprise anybody. So now we go back to the activities summary, and we see that final building was granted on May 6, 2014. And the last action that the city took was to put the engineer's letter into the city's file for the project. And here's the letter from Ashley Vance, excellent structural engineer. We use them all the time on our projects. And there it is, calculation detail packet. The railing's designed to resist 200 pounds. I don't think there can be any question about the fact that the city knew about this railing, required documentation of this railing, reviewed that documentation, and approved this railing with a final sign-off. So for the staff report to make the assertion that there was no review during the building permit process, I view these things as sort of kind of a review. Let's go to the next thing. Has final inspection or occupancy clearance been revoked? I think that's important. The staff report here provides this code section, which says basically they can revoke any permit they issue anytime they want for any reason they want. But what it also says is it's the duty of the community development director. That doesn't mean staff can just decide when they're out on a project that they think something's a violation and now your permit's revoked it means the community development director has to revoke your permit. Revocation is an action that has to be taken, and we don't see any evidence anywhere in the city records that this permit was ever revoked. And, sure enough, if you go to the city's website this morning, here is the status of our permit. It's still a certificate of occupancy issued and final inspection passed. This is an approved railing right now as we sit here. So who's responsible for implementing city process? And I really appreciate Mr. Cologne's elaboration before, but this speaks to that. Let's look at this paragraph. So that part we agree with. To document changes, an owner needs to submit to Building and Safety the revision. And they did that. And they were directed to do it. And as I showed you before, they did it and got their sign off. Okay, but what this says next, this is where this thing takes a sharp right turn and sort of veers off into the woods. Because the improvements were subject to review by the SFDB, the owner should have also requested a review from the SFDB. Now, myself and my coworkers, we process a lot of permits, and this does not match up with our experience processing permits or revisions. When we have a revision and we come in for it or are directed to come in for it, if it involves anything on the exterior of a building, the building counter staff send us over to zoning to get the zoning sign off. If we've got plans, if it's that substantial, zoning actually stamps them. And if it's something more minor, I believe they just document it in Tidemark or whatever the city system is. But the building department has some record that zoning's okayed it. Now, in this case, I don't know if this happened, but when I read that, what I see when I read that is we're not accountable. We're not accountable for this situation. The applicant should have done it. And, that's not how the city, if that's a new city policy, that's news to me. That's not how we've been doing business with the city for years. Can an owner or applicant rely on an inspection or C of O? And this speaks to a larger community issue. Can anybody rely on it when the city issues a permit? And could the appellant rely on it? So, here's the text from the staff report, and it says pretty clearly the city should not be issuing a certificate of occupancy until basically every single condition the city has been met. Okay, that means this is the ultimate permit you can get of anything from the city precisely because it says you have satisfied every condition we have, and therefore we give you this certificate of occupancy. And I believe that an owner and the community has the right to rely on that. The staff report would have you believe that, well, we can issue a certificate of occupancy, but if it turns out later we think we did it wrong or we don't agree with the process, we can revoke it. And we disagree with that, okay? The city has an obligation to get it right. When you are going to issue a certificate of occupancy and final inspection on a project, that's it. That's the last bite at the apple. You don't get to keep coming back and asking for more or making people do more stuff. That is the last stop on the road, and it has to be correct before it's issued based on what that says right there. That is the certification every condition has been satisfied. And my clients relied upon that. When they bought this house, they bought it with a certificate of occupancy in place. And they had a right to assume based on that the house was approved in the condition that it was in. So what was the SFDB's basis to deny this railing? Ms. Unzueta embellished that significantly from what happened at that hearing. I've watched the whole hearing. I would encourage you to watch the hearing if you haven't seen it. This is the minutes. These are the minutes from July 9th. They start at the bottom of the left page and go halfway down the other one. The only one we care about is this one right here. Okay? That's it. That is the basis that the SFDB found for denial, that they just deny it. They deny that it can't remain on the property and it needs to be removed from the site. There's no information there about neighborhood compatibility or glare or anything like that. In fact, if you watch that hearing, there are multiple statements by the chair, Fred Sweeney, and I think also Mr. Miller, where they say glare isn't the issue, because the architect had argued, look, this doesn't cause glare. And they said, glare's not the issue here. We don't care about that. But now all of a sudden it becomes a basis for the finding. Well, that's the finding right there, and it's pretty cut and dry, and it lacks any information like that. At the hearing, there were a lot of global statements about how glass railings aren't okay in Santa Barbara, and this isn't Redondo Beach, and some things like that, sort of, subjective. I mean, of course it's not Redondo Beach, but there's no ordinance prohibition or design guideline that we have adopted in the city of Santa Barbara that prohibits the use of glass railings. And the SFDB, they also said, I think Fred Sweeney said, we are never going to approve a glass railing in Santa Barbara. So, I mean, to have one board member setting a new policy for the city and effectively ad hoc revising our ordinances, I don't know if that's something that is a good, path to go down, but that's sort of what's happened here. Let's see. At this point, I'm going to get into the railing itself. Okay, we assert we've gotten approval here, and that's where we're at. But let's talk about this railing in order for you to make these findings that we're talking about today. So this is a photo from the end of May, right after this project was signed off. There's the railing that was signed off. There's a couple of other photos. I picked these ones from the MLS because they show it really well, and they're a lot nicer than the photo that I took, which is that one right there. But that photo is from yesterday at our site visit. Now, Mr. Miller and the board and Mr. Colon just said, these impacts of the railing to Santa Barbara and the visibility. I think we need to put that in perspective, and that's what I'm going to do with this visibility study. That's our property up there. And I did 4 locations, which it was actually a struggle to find places that have a direct line of sight to this property, but I picked 4 that I think are pretty representative. And the first one of these is Medio Road, right below us. So there's the roadway. This is the closest place where you can see this from. Now, this is what you should be looking at when you're driving down Medio Road on the Riviera. But were you to look for this house, here's the first place you can see it when it comes out from behind that house on the left. Okay, so that's us. That's what it looks like. It's not overly prominent in this view, but sure, you can see it. If you go down the road a little bit further, you can see it some more. If you keep going down the road and look 90 degrees to your path of travel, you can see it between these 2 trees. And I want to point out here that even this close, that railing disappears. It's invisible, which it shouldn't surprise anyone. It's clear glass. It should be invisible. And if it was tinted, you'd actually see it more. It disappears the way it is. And also look at the sun angle. That's an angle where sun, if sun was going to reflect off that, it would be. But as I'll get to later, it doesn't. So the next view, this is down on Canon Perdido Street. So here's where the view's from. And then if we go down there and take a look back, here's our view of the Riviera. Okay, is that house overwhelming this view? There's our house. I promise that the pixel at the top of that arrow is touching our roof. Okay, is this a significant view impact to the city of Santa Barbara in any way? This is probably the closest place at the bottom of the Riviera you can see the house from. Next, we'll go over to the junior high in Ortega Park. I took it from this corner because if you go to the other one, you can't see the house because of trees and topography. But here's where the view is. That's where I was standing. And here's the Riviera viewed from down there. There's our house. Significant view impacts. Finally, let's go over to the courthouse observation deck. There it is, viewed from our site, so you can see the line of sight. And then here it is looking back. And I'm not just going to beat this point to death. I think 4 examples of this gives you reasonable perspective about what sort of impacts this could have. We also did a reflection study, even though they said that wasn't an issue. So this program calculator's here. You can put your longitude and latitude into it and pick whatever time of year you want. It tells you the sun angle, which then allows you to make an exhibit like this. which my client made, and it's as good as anything I could do, so here it is. Basically, the first thing we're going to look at is at the summer solstice, where the sun is at the highest angle, it hits that railing, and it's going to come off at the same angle, and it hits the ground right next to the building in this case. And this is a worst-case scenario. And then the other worst-case scenario, here's what that looks like if you want to see it in real life. The next worst-case scenario is at winter solstice when the sun's really low. This probably is the worst case. And the sun will come in, hit that, and it reflects back at the same angle. And because of how deep this yard is, the reflected light hits our property. It doesn't reflect down into the city. So that's what these exhibits show. So here's what it looks like in real life. It's going to hit right about there. So I'll try to blow through these and save some time. The city identified this railing, and they requested documentation of it. The building department staff were responsible for ensuring that this thing complied with city requirements, not the applicant. Okay, for some reason, whatever reason, the building department staff elected not to route this to zoning. They had the opportunity to do it. They reviewed the calculations and details, and they approved the documentation and gave this a final inspection. And the appellant had a fully valid inspection and C of O when the city said this was a violation later. We assert it never was a violation. It never should have been in front of Single Family Design Board. The Single Family Design Board doesn't have the right to make people change parts of their house that are fully approved and signed off. And if they do, that's going to open up a whole nother nest of problems. The SFDB didn't make any explanatory findings when they denied the railing. They just said it has to be removed, despite what Ms. Unzueta added in her presentation today. That's not what the board did. The SFDB approved this residence, which is, it's ultra modern, I would say, and they determined the whole thing's compatible with that neighborhood. And this railing is appropriate to the design of that house. It doesn't alter compatibility of the house in any material way versus a cable railing with the neighborhood. In fact, you can't see the railing even from the closest viewpoints. And it's not a prominent feature of any public views. You can't even see this house from most places. And there's no city ordinance or design guidelines that prohibit glass railings. And because of the unique characteristics of this site, there's no glare issues from this particular railing. So that's our presentation. I think that the council can make these findings and approve this de novo if you had to, but our assertion is that it's currently approved right now. So I can answer any questions you have.
Okay, so you have 2 minutes, 22 seconds left. Are there questions for Mr. Gorin? I don't see any, so thanks. We'll move on to the next part. Presentation from the applicant, so there's nothing to add. Mr. Casey?
I'm sorry, the owner of the property is the appellants. They're one and the same.
No, I said applicant. So is that us, the city?
There is no presentation. They're essentially the applicant and the appellant and the owner.
Okay.
They're all one. You're not getting two different arguments. There is no competing side here today.
Okay. So staff doesn't have any response at this point to, okay. Any questions from the council? We have one, Mr. Gutierrez, and then Mr. Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Did you also do a light reflection study on the glass?
Who's that?
To staff.
No, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, no. Building and Safety did not require or do a study of the reflectivity of the glass railing.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dominguez?
Mr. Gorin indicated that there's no city ordinance or design rule against glass railings. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Dominguez, there is a guideline, I had it in front of me just now, that it pertains to glass material, where it indicates, and I wanted to read it to you, basically that glass for deck railings or guardrails is not the preferred materials in the highly visible locations of the city. So I wanted, sorry about that.
Just to clarify, it's in attachment 4.
Mhm.
It's glass material 16.7 of the City of Santa Barbara
Yes.
Single Family Residence Design Guidelines. It's our attachment 4.
So you interpret that as a discretionary or a rule against it? How does your staff interpret that?
Madam Mayor, excuse me,
Thank you.
Councilmember Dominguez, I'm sorry to interrupt. The full section that's in attachment 4 on the third to last page of your report says that if you do take your chances with glass, installations of reflective glass materials will be reviewed to determine if the installation is compatible with the structure and that it does not create significant glare problems.
So Mr. Gorin's correct in the sense there's no blanket prohibition of glass. It's only
He is
prohibited.
correct. If he can prove to your satisfaction that there are not significant glare problems, there's not a blanket rule against glass.
And you're suggesting they have to prove there's no glare problems. It's not the city's burden to prove that there is a glare problem, the way you read this.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, that's a very good question. I do believe it's their burden because I don't believe they have a vested right. They haven't shown, at least on this record, and I hope we don't have to elsewhere, the factors that create an estoppel in this kind of situation. I would respectfully submit that any time you're dealing with a problem that's of cumulative impact, an isolated incident it may not be significant. So if you're talking about one window on the mountain backdrop or Riviera, whatever it is, that's likely never to be significant. The concern of these kinds of regulations is to give you control to stop the entire backdrop from turning into a mirror.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you. I have a question and then comments, if that's all right.
We have a public comment, so go ahead and ask questions
So
now,
the
please.
one question I have is, have there been complaints about the glare against this property?
Madam Mayor and council members, then I am not aware of any complaints against this property with respect to glare.
I would point out that I received several emails from neighbors supporting the glass railing, actually, and none from neighbors that are saying they don't like it. Mr. Gutierrez, your light's still on? Another question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Is there a potential of the glare somehow starting a fire? Is it powerful enough to do that?
Well, we don't have a fire marshal here, but
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, I have served as a fire marshal. I don't believe that this guardrail is capable of igniting a fire.
okay, so I'm going to note your 2 minutes and 20 seconds if you want them. Ms. Gott, Anna Marie Gott is our only public speaker.
Good afternoon. One thing to note again, that your design boards really do not understand all of their responsibilities, and neither does staff. Another thing to note is Mr. DiPaolo had 10 days in which to appeal that final approval, and he did nothing. He decided that he was going to pull a bait and switch and see if he could get a glass railing installed. And he did, because the person who actually came and inspected it, they don't necessarily have all of the information that is actually required from this single-family design board or any other board when they are checking something off. They are not part of the design board. It is not their responsibility to make sure that every single item for a certificate of occupancy is actually there. If you really wanted to do this, and what should have happened is a review after final. That is what should have happened. But A review after final did not occur, and that is Mr. DiPaolo's fault. You would have found this out in 2014 or 2015 when this originally occurred, and we would not be here today. But we are here because of a bait and switch. We are here because someone wanted to go ahead and see what they could get past the city. This happens all the time. You are aware, of course, we have a 2-story building on the Mesa that was permitted as a 1-story. We have a home on the Mesa that was built as a 2-story because someone did a bait and switch. We obviously did not have them tear down the building, which we should have. But this is a death by 1,000 cuts. If you allow this, you allow 1,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. So, Mr. Gordon, do you want to? Okay, 2 more minutes.
Okay, so, Madam Mayor, members of the council, this is not a highly visible location. I think we more than demonstrated that. Highly visible locations are directly adjacent to roads. The Moxie Museum, that's a pretty highly visible location, and lo and behold, it's got a big old glass railing all the way around the top. So certainly glass railings are allowed, certainly in a place like this that you have to, I can see it because I can blow that picture up times 100 and find our house, but you can't see it when you're walking around out in town. Another thing I think we need to keep in our minds here is all glass is reflective. There's nothing unique about this railing that makes it more reflective than other glass. And people don't choose to live on the Riviera because of the convenient road access. They live up there because they like the views. And most houses up there have large amounts of glass all over the back of the house facing the city, and it all reflects. And there's nothing special about the reflection from this glass railing than any other window on the Riviera. And this isn't even any particularly larger than any other group of windows on the Riviera. And finally, yes, there have been no complaints about this from anybody. And even our next door neighbor, who's maybe the only person who could be affected, both the owner and the tenant wrote in neighbors in support of this project. So I don't think there's some big community issue here where we'd have to worry that the city, us relying on this and us being able to rely on a final city decision, that somehow the mistake of one person, and by the way, I don't think it's the mistake of one person. I think more than one person reviewed this, if it's the same building department I know, is going to create some massive impact to the rest of the community. Clearly it's not. So those are my responses. I really appreciate you giving me the time. Thank you.
Thank you. We will close public comment, and now deliberations are to the council. So, Mr. Rouse, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. As we have reviewed all this and the amounts of material and whatnot, it seems like there's more of a debate about procedure and process than there's about the material and the actual physical presence of this glass rail itself. And as I look at the design review guidelines and I look at the visibility, I look at the impacts that, state mandated or state required solar panels without permits go on everywhere, reflectivity. This comes up as a tempest in teapot to me. With all due respect to the Single Family Design Review Board, and I do definitely respect their process and their work, I look at what kind of blight this may or may not cause in the neighborhood. I don't see it. I think about what the consequences would be if we were to demand that it be removed and then we put in the cable railing. Aesthetically, those glass railings seem to virtually disappear. So with that being said, I'd like to start off the discussion by making a motion to uphold the appeal.
Okay, that was a second from Councilmember Snedden. And your deliberative comments, please.
Thank you. I think I want to go through each of these points because I think we can make all of the findings, skipping 4 and 5 because they don't apply here. But for 1, consistency and appearance, my goodness, what a beautiful home you have and building. And I think it adds to the appearance of the whole neighborhood. I think it is consistent. It's with modern aesthetics. Compatibility, it's appropriate not just for the design of the building, but also appropriate for particular care for the bulk and scale for what the balcony is. it fades into the background. It doesn't stand out against nature, but it allows you to see the nature and to be able to see past the glass railing, quality architecture and materials, and again, that with the natural appearance. It's glass, so we can see through it. I think also because it's the balcony has 3 sides on it, you're not getting glare and reflection from multiple sides through the glass, and I think it does disappear, as you say. For the good neighbor guidelines, had there been any complaints at all, I would take those seriously, and having none, and not just that, but letters of support, that sways also. And then when it bringing in effect lighting, I think because it is shaded on all sides, the lighting of that, this isn't, I think, to be seen as a test case for all glass railings exposed and overhanging on all sides. It's a low railing. It does have breaks in the glass, and it is shaded on all sides. And then from public views, I think I was convinced that that's not any more visible than a picture window would be, or any other panel of glass like that. And I don't even think we need to go to the estoppel, but I would say that I don't have any idea who Mr. DiPaolo is, or so any comments about the previous owners or what anybody's trying to pull or not, I really have no idea. But you have new owners who came in with a final inspection passed, and I don't think any expectation that would be revoked for any reason. And I don't think it passes the standard of having a significant impact on a large number of people. So really, I think on all counts, I will uphold the appeal.
Madam Mayor, if I might?
Mr. Kahlon?
Thank you. This is a moment here to take advantage of. It would be great if the maker of the motion would accept Councilmember Sneddon's comments as your findings. I think if you do that in your minutes and they're transcribed properly, we can avoid bringing back a resolution. So when you're making your motions and seconds on these appeals, it would be wonderful to have the reasons clearly articulated. What we've been doing up till now is taking all of your comments and writing a resolution that reflects back to you what you said. But when you can hit it on the head with 4 points, we can just rely on the minutes for those findings and save a lot of time.
Mr. Rouse, is that acceptable to you?
I'll stipulate to Councilmember Sneddon's eloquent summation.
And Ms. Sneddon, did you get them from page 5 of the council agenda report?
I did, and they're also in the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Madam Clerk, do you need this for your notes, or got it?
No, we can include Councilmember Sneddon's comments in the.
You got it. Okay. Very good. Mr. Dominguez?
I think the important point to emphasize here is that mistakes will be made. It's just human. In terms of Mr. Gorn's question, can an owner rely on a certificate? I think the standard answer we teach in law schools, it depends. It's not a blanket yes. It's going to be highly case by case, particularly in Santa Barbara. You know, are there life safety issues involved versus aesthetic versus, interpretation? So here, where I don't see any indications that anyone acted in bad faith, where I don't see any safety issues, where it would be very expensive to redo this. And I think what you want to do often is look at, did they do something to save money? In this case, clearly the opposite is true. They wanted to beautify their home and their neighborhood. And we aren't always going to accept that. So anyone watching this hearing thinking you can just do what you want, do believe that to your detriment and your long-term expense. But everyone else who's more reasonable, ask your board for permission first. Don't try to get forgiveness afterwards. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Friedman?
Well, too, will be supporting the motion. I just think today we're here for an unfortunate circumstance, but I think we're able to work through those issues today, and I appreciate the work of the Design Review Board that they put into this. They put a lot of thought into this. We happen to have a disagreement today, but we definitely appreciate their work. And I think when it gets to the design guidelines of 16.7, where it says the deck railing material should be selected to be consistent with the architecture style of the structure, the picture there says it all. It's very consistent. and that the use of glass railings or as windscreens should not be the preferred material at highly visible locations. I appreciate the work that the applicant did, the homeowner did, in terms of looking at the glare and having that up there. I think that's a key issue that we were able to look at today to show that the impacts are minimal. And the other thing that was really important to me, my decision is that the neighbors who were most affected by this down the street, who could see it, all of them who contacted us, and it was multiple, I think it was about 4 or 5 of them, all contacted in support of this, and there was no neighborhood opposition from those who would have the most at stake if we were to take another action. So based on the neighbor support was really something that moved me on it. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Thanks. Mr. Hart.
Yeah, I agree with all my council colleagues. I think this situation points out the value of a zoning information report. So just folks who are out purchasing property, probably a good idea to have that. I disagree with Ms. Gott's characterization of this being a threat to Santa Barbara by a death from 1,000 cuts. I think this is a paper cut.
Very good. I'll add that Mr. Gorin, you made a very compelling case, very convincing with your argumentation. The railing had been reviewed by the city. That said, I think the Single Family Design Review Board and staff did their jobs too. You found something that needed to be brought to the attention of to the process. Ask your questions about glass railings. Please ask about neighborhood compatibility. But when we visited, sometimes the site visit is illustrative, and I'm glad we went out there. The neighbors are okay with it, and the new owners, should not be held accountable for any irregularities that they didn't cause, either by the former owner or other unfortunate actions that you're not responsible for. So, and thank you for having us there. Very, very beautiful home. So we'll go ahead and vote if we've all had our say. We all know what the motion is? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes, and we'll go ahead and close that item with thanks to our staff and the public who are here. And the next item is our staff communications. I have some. I know Ms. Sneddon and then Mr. Friedman.
Again, several of these we all attended, or many of us attended. Enjoyed the annual employee picnic. I think that was really great opportunity to socialize and get to know each other. Attended the AIA panel discussion on downtown. Also had the opportunity to attend Camerata Pacifica, Elliot Fisk playing Bach and Schubert, and I think the city contributes to Camerata Pacifica, and they periodically invite us to come and see a show at the Music Academy of the West, and I highly recommend that you take this opportunity to appreciate what it is that we're doing to support the arts. I attended our city council retreat, which I found very valuable, and would be happy to meet with anybody or talk with anybody who had questions about any of our perspectives there, or about my perspective, I suppose. Attended youth council last night. They are continuing with an ad hoc youth council subcommittee on gun safety, and effective November 1st, their regular meetings will be moved to 5 p.m. They wanted us to be sure to let the public know. They are recruiting for new positions. They're looking for junior high students and alternative school students, and the deadline for that is October 16th. And they will be hosting a Santa Barbara Unified School District Candidates Forum October 22nd, 5:30 at Louise Lowry Davis Center. And that's all. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Friedman?
So as mentioned earlier, I attended the Central Coast Water Authority meeting, and then I also attended with our mayor the Vista del Monte grand reopening. It's a retirement community along Modoc Road there. It was great to see the new facilities and to see our seniors, and many of them are local residents that have retired there. So it was a great event. I too attended our city council retreat, and I felt got a lot out of it. And I'm happy to talk with anybody who has questions about it. But I felt it was very valuable to get to know my fellow council members. And one of the most interesting exercises was when why we ran for office, and we all had a compelling story, and we learned a lot about each other that way. And also attended the Santa Barbara Beautiful Annual Awards. And I just want to take a minute here to explain that the significance of this event, in that the board, and in particular the leadership of their president, Jacqueline Dyson, like myself and Councilmember Sneddon and Mayor Murillo, and all of us, but especially myself and Councilmember Sneddon, she became president of Santa Barbara Beautiful on the day of the debris flow, and they actually had their first board meeting that day. And then out of that, they had a big discussion a couple months later, and I, as a liaison, I attended their board meeting on how they should go forward with their awards ceremony this year in relation to that. And so they had a real just kind of powwow and a good debate, and they decided to go forward with the awards ceremony this year. Mm-hmm. And they also decided to make some changes to the format, and also to kind of restructure the types of awards that are going into the future to really revitalize the event. And there was a lot of give and take during that meeting and subsequently, and they're really focusing now on environmental and community awards. And it culminated with an outstanding event that they had at the Music Academy of the West, and their Jack Randa Award, which is their grand award, they gave to the Montecito Bucket Brigade for their work that we all know that they've done. And it was really great. A couple hundred people there to honor them and others. And they also gave a special award that they created for this year called the King Palm Award. And they gave it to John Palmentary for his efforts in not only covering the fire and the debris flow, but also his coverage of the healing that we've gone through and just the beauty that came out of our community and the response to it. So I really want to commend Jacqueline Dyson and the full board of Santa Barbara Beautiful for your event on Sunday, and you made the right decision, and it was a tough one, and it's really valued, and all the people who were there really appreciate it.
Thanks. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you. I also attended the AIA forum on downtown. That was really fascinating to see all these different city managers come together and give their advice on what we can possibly do for the city. I also attended the employee picnic. That was a lot of fun, and it allowed an opportunity to speak with the city employees that we don't get to see on a regular basis. And I also attended the retreat, and I felt like the only thing was that I wish it could have gone on longer because I was learning so much. I didn't want it to end, really. And I also want to state that I went to social media and promoted the retreat to the public to try to entice more people to show up. I even invited somebody to come video record the retreat. We discussed things from my point of view very honestly. We didn't agree on everything, and I think that's really healthy. And I don't appreciate that people are cherry picking moments that you can't see the overall reaction of people's faces or body language when certain things are being said, especially if it's just audio. So I don't appreciate that when there was so much positive that came out of it, but they're choosing to just nitpick on the negative. That just goes to show you where their mindset is, and I just want to say overall it was a great experience.
Thank you. Mr. Dominguez.
So I attended the AIA panel discussion, and there were some great ideas that I hope we follow up on. I didn't attend the Saturday meeting. I had to work, and it's my firm belief we should do city business here at City Hall. the exact phenomena that Mr. Gutierrez witnessed, if he thinks people were cherry picking because they were hearing thing on audio where you didn't see people, we can avoid that 100% by just meeting here and doing government business here in this room. If we want to get to know each other, there's the other 6.5 days of the week when we're not here in session where we can spend time together, and a lot of us do. I've had great moments with everyone in this room, outside of this room, and I think we should do more of that. So I don't think it's an either or. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we should focus, though, on city business, particularly if people have raised complaints about public comment or feeling restricted. That's something that we should talk about here in this room. So that's just my opinion, and that's all.
Mr. Hart.
Last week, I attended the Santa Barbara Taxpayers Association's Executive Leadership Summit, and Mr. Casey represented the city very capably and skillfully. It was a forum where all the city managers from the different incorporated cities and the county executive officer were describing their views on their local governments and the reactions to different issues in the community, and it was really helpful and insightful to see the complexity of the different communities and the different approaches to the same issues countywide. I attended the ribbon cutting for the Unity Shop with Councilmember Councilmember Gutierrez and Mayor Murillo. They were celebrating 100 years of serving the community and opening up some new businesses on State Street. I also attended the AIA discussion about downtown and was really surprised, honestly, about some of the things that were being used as examples of things that we should emulate. And I just have to say that, the presentation from San Luis Obispo was great, and they're a wonderful city, but, they have an 11% vacancy rate downtown, which sounds an awful lot like State Street. And there was a lot of talk about Santa Monica and the 3rd Street Promenade. And so I was down in Los Angeles this weekend because I went to the Equality California Awards, where they were awarding activists at the state level who are working in support of the LGBT community. So I went to Santa Monica to check out the 3rd Street Promenade. And there's only 3 blocks there, and one of the blocks has a lot of vacancies. So I think that oftentimes it is easy for us to lose track of the fact that State Street is much more than a glass half full. It is a remarkably beautiful downtown that is glowing, frankly, and there is a lot of angst and trepidation and drama in our town about the fate of downtown. But when we look carefully at the examples that people are using around the country as incredible success stories, it doesn't look that very different to me. And I think we should all take some time to go to these places and see if, in fact, we are doing something so radically wrong, or if, in fact, we're really lucky to live in Santa Barbara.
Very good. I will add to Councilmember Friedman's report on the Santa Barbara Beautiful Awards that the Chase Palm Park received an award. And so the good work our Parks Department does, though of course it's just kind of nature, right? It's a park right on the beach. So Vista Del Monte, I just have to give a shout out. One lady is my neighbor. She used to be my neighbor when I lived in San Roque for a short time, and she adopted our cat. And I love going to these community events because like 30 years later, you run into somebody who is, your neighbor and your friend or your coworker. That's Santa Barbara. The Unity Shop ribbon cutting, what I'll add to that is that the place where Random used to be, and people will know that location, the Unity Shop has moved in there. And they're also helping the Montecito debris flow survivors with finding furniture and other items. So I wanted to give them some credit for that. The employees' picnic, it's always an honor to break bread with our staff. And a short report on the retreat that we had. The first segment was to analyze our personality types and our communication styles. And then we went through a list of what our council members believed are challenges for us. At the top of the list was representing the city at large versus district representation. I'll say more about that in a minute. How we put items on the agenda, treatment of city staff, As for the transition to district representation, the council agreed that we should attend neighborhood meetings and events outside of our districts. So it'll be really interesting, right, Mr. Rouse, if you go to a West Side meeting or or to the Upper East Neighborhood Association. So we shouldn't just be in our own neighborhoods. I think we know that, but it was good to make that agreement. We also talked about the Neighborhood Advisory Council and how its agenda items are subjects that everybody in the city would be interested in. Neighborhood Watch, our capital improvement project program. And so we've agreed to try and tell our residents in our district, hey, the Neighborhood Advisory Council is meeting and there's a really cool topic, to try to get more people to come to that venue. And then we talked about council procedures and motion making, and there was a concern about public comment speakers pooling time and abusing that privilege. So any decision that we make has to come back to this room and a formal public hearing. So that will be coming. Mr. Casey, with some of the things that we talked about and suggestions that we offered in terms of council procedures. So thank you very much, everyone. And we have closed session items. Ms. Clerk?
Item 15, conference with city attorney, anticipated litigation, as described in agenda item number 15. Number 16, conference with city attorney, anticipated litigation, as described in agenda item 16. And agenda item 17, conference with city attorney, existing litigation, as described in agenda item 17.
And we do not expect to report back on any action we take in there. So we'll adjourn this meeting to closed session. Thank you.